Hey guys, did you know that a lot of you who watch my videos aren't subscribed yet? I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button. And don't forget to like the video and leave a comment below. Your interaction really helps the channel grow and allows more people to see my content. Thanks so much for your support. The fall colors were peaking in Baxter State Park, a fiery explosion of reds and golds against the deep green pines. It was October 2024, and I was solo camping, a much-needed escape from the constant demands of my tech startup. No wife, no kids, just me, my trusty drone, and the promise of some stunning aerial footage. I found the perfect spot, a secluded clearing by a pristine lake. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I set up my ultralight tent, fired up my portable campfire, and settled in with a locally brewed IPA. I even managed to snag a decent Wi-Fi signal, enough to upload a few scenic shots to Instagram with the hashtag solo camping. But as darkness enveloped the forest, a primal fear started to stir within me. The silence was broken by strange sounds, a guttural growl, the snapping of branches, a chilling howl that echoed through the trees. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear or a pack of coyotes. But deep down, I knew it was something else, something far more sinister. I reached for my bear spray, my heart pounding in my chest. I'd never encountered anything truly dangerous in the wilderness, but the stories I'd read online about mysterious creatures and unexplained disappearances flashed through my mind. Suddenly, a pair of glowing eyes pierced the darkness, their intensity sending shivers down my spine. The creature emerged from the shadows, its form shifting and distorted, its growl morphing into a chilling, almost human-like wail. Panic surged through me. I fumbled for my phone, the screen illuminating my trembling hands. No signal. Of course. I was alone, completely isolated, with no way to call for help. The creature lunged, its claws raking the side of my tent. I screamed, scrambling back, my mind racing. I had to get out of there, escape the clutches of whatever monstrous thing was stalking me. I grabbed my backpack, my camera, and my drone, and sprinted towards the lake. The creature was right behind me, its howls echoing through the night. I jumped into my kayak, paddling furiously, my arms burning with exertion. As I reached the middle of the lake, I glanced back, and my blood ran cold. The creature stood on the shore, its silhouette illuminated by the moon. It wasn't a bear, not a wolf, not anything I'd ever seen before. It was tall, humanoid, with glowing red eyes and a maw full of razor-sharp teeth. I paddled until my muscles screamed for mercy, until the shoreline was nothing but a distant memory. I collapsed on the shore, exhausted and terrified, the creature's howls still ringing in my ears. The next morning, I reported the incident to the park rangers. They listened with a polite disinterest, their eyes betraying a hint of amusement. They offered me a pamphlet on wildlife safety and suggested I invest in a better headlamp. But I knew what I had seen. It wasn't a bear, not a wolf, not any known creature. It was something else, something that lurked in the shadows, something that preyed on unsuspecting campers. I left Baxter State Park, my sense of adventure replaced by a lingering dread. I tried to forget the incident, to bury the fear deep within me. But the memory of those glowing eyes, that chilling howl, continued to haunt me. Months later, I stumbled upon a forum dedicated to unexplained phenomena. There, buried among the grainy photos and outlandish claims, I found a thread about the beast of Baxter State Park. Others had seen it too, that creature of the night, that shape-shifting horror. I read their stories, each one more chilling than the last. Hikers vanishing without a trace, campers found mutilated in their tents, whispers of a creature that could mimic human voices, luring its victims to their doom. I realized then that I wasn't alone, that the creature was real, and that it was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. I haven't been camping since. The wilderness, once a source of solace and adventure, now holds a terrifying new meaning. And sometimes, when the wind howls through the trees, I can still hear the echoes of that chilling wail, a reminder of the night I encountered the beast of Baxter State Park and barely escaped with my life. My best friend, Jason, was a devout man. He believed in God, the afterlife, the whole 9 yards. We talked about it countless times, usually fueled by a couple of bottles of cheap wine. Faith had been ingrained in him since he was a kid. Church every Sunday, knew the Latin Mass backwards, just like his old man, David. He even dreamed of becoming a priest one day, or a deacon, whichever one would still let him settle down with a wife and have a family. Jason always preached about a merciful God, an understanding God, a God who would welcome everyone, including our openly gay best friend. Little did he know he'd be drawn and quartered for his so-called sins. The shock hit me like a punch to the gut. That initial wave of nausea and bile soon gave way to pure, unadulterated panic. I couldn't tell you when it happened, but my thoughts were a blur, my vision hazy. The shadows from the trees seemed to writhe and twist in the darkness, mocking me. I must have stared at Jason's severed arm for an hour, trying to comprehend what kind of monster could have done this to him. And then it clicked. The 4 limbs, the cryptic letter, the animalistic sounds echoing through the woods, it all added up. I'd read about this in history class. Drawn and quartered. Each limb tied to a separate horse, then, the horrific climax. Some sick bastard yells go, and the horses tear the victim apart. I found the remains of my poor friend's torso closer to our cabin, confirming my gruesome theory. His head was nowhere to be found. Jason's Nirvana t-shirt clung to his torso, the tattered fabric barely concealing the brutal severing that had left small pools of blood congealing at each corner of his body. The shock of that image, the undeniable reality of Jason's death, it finally triggered my fight or flight response. I sprinted back towards the cabin, branches whipping at my face. I could hear things moving in the woods, their unseen presence spurring me on. All I could think about was Emily, my wife. Rain mingled with my tears, but I didn't care. Reaching the cabin, I pounded on the door, desperate to wake everyone up. Stacy was the first to open the door. I didn't even give her a chance to speak. Jason's dead. He's been drawn and quartered. His arms, his legs, they're everywhere. His Nirvana shirt, oh God, it's awful. We need help. Help me. A small voice piped up from inside the cabin. What are you talking about? I stumbled over my words, trying to explain the gruesome scene to Casey. She burst into tears, while Veronica yelled at me to calm down and speak clearly. Stacy, ever the pragmatist, rummaged through her bag and pulled out something long, shoving it into the waistband of her jeans. Is that a gun? I asked, incredulous. Someone has to protect us, she replied, her voice steely. Veronica, Casey, and Emily turned on Stacy, their fear turning to anger. They screamed at her as she pushed past me and out into the night, a rifle clutched in her hand. Stacy, no! Don't go out there. I heard someone. She ignored me, disappearing into the darkness. I followed, the others' screams echoing behind me. We reached the edge of the parking lot, where Stacy paused, peering through the scope of her rifle. I see a light, she gasped. Those were her last words. A shot rang out, the bullet slicing through the leaves before finding its mark. Stacy's head snapped back as if she'd been struck by an invisible force. Blood and other things splattered my face. Before I could even scream, more shots erupted from the woods. Casey collapsed in the doorway. Veronica fell trying to reach for the gun, both victims of the unseen assailant. Emily, thank God, had the sense to retreat back into the cabin and lock the door. A gruff voice boomed through the trees. Got the whores and the adulterer. Just like their Facebook pictures. Two left. His words gave him away. The voice pinpointed his location in the darkness. Stupid. Adrenaline surged through me. I grabbed Stacy's rifle. I wasn't a gun expert, but I'd been to the range enough times to know the basics. I knew how to aim, how to shoot, and how to pray for a lucky shot. As the echoes of gunfire faded, I crouched behind our minivan, my eyes scanning the woods. A flicker of that same flashlight, and I fired. Brian's hit. You fucking murderers, the voice roared back. I didn't wait to hear any more. Bullets whizzed past my head as I scrambled back to the cabin, yanking Emily out the door. She was hysterical, fighting me, desperate to stay inside. I dragged her away from the cabin, my grip firm but gentle. And then we ran. We ran for what felt like hours, our lungs burning, our legs screaming for rest. We didn't look back, not even once. I didn't know if they were still after us, if they'd given up, or if they were content with fulfilling their twisted poem. Eventually, we stumbled onto a road. I flagged down the first car we saw, my voice trembling as I recounted the horrifying events. Part of me feared it could be them, the killers. But the driver, a kind-faced woman, immediately pulled out her phone and called the police. I collapsed in the back seat, exhaustion finally claiming me. The cops searched every inch of those woods, but they found nothing. No bodies, no trace of our friends. For a while, Emily and I were suspects. But the fact that our rifle had only been fired once made that theory unlikely. We tried to rebuild our lives, to find some semblance of normalcy in our cramped city apartment. It felt safe, secure. We bought extra locks, triple-checking them every night. We deleted our social media accounts, convinced that's how they found us. But that sense of security shattered recently. On Saturday, we received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was eerily familiar, that same chicken scratch as the first. The police considered it the first contact in 2 years. 2 souls went into the pretty little city all on their own. They have read the sign shown in this poem. But the man in an eye window has too perfect a view of the street below. One cloudy day, one just won't make it home. Forests really are strange, aren't they? Miles and miles of trees, stretching into the distance like an endless green sea. Sometimes they're so secluded that you feel like the only person on earth, swallowed by the silence and the shadows. It's easy to get lost in their depths, both physically and mentally. Forests creep a lot of people out, myself included. However, about a week ago, I stumbled upon something I never could have imagined, hidden deep in the woods behind my house. Something that chilled me to the bone and still haunts my dreams. I live on a 7.5-acre plot of land in northern Michigan, my backyard bordering a massive forest that seems to go on forever. It's a common sight in these parts, the transition from civilization to wilderness swift and stark. Though I've lived here a while, I've rarely ventured far into those woods. As someone who grew up in a bustling city, the dense, shadowy woods have always unsettled me. My property is only a few miles from the nearest town, but it's a small town, easily swallowed by the vastness of the Michigan wilderness. The forest behind my house is a mix of evergreen and hardwood trees, the air thick with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. Close to my house, the woods are manageable, even inviting. But beyond my property line, marked by a line of crackling power lines, the forest deepens, darkens, and becomes a place where the familiar rules of the world seem to fade. One crisp autumn morning, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to push further into the woods than I ever had before, hoping to shake off the unease and maybe even discover something interesting. It was a dreary day, the sky overcast with a bleak grayish hue that mirrored my apprehension. The wind howled through the trees, their branches swaying like ghostly arms beckoning me forward. "Great weather for a hike," I muttered sarcastically, already feeling a prickle of unease. I knew I was being overly paranoid, but a nagging feeling in the back of my mind whispered that something was amiss. I trudged through a maze of trees, bushes, fallen logs, and ferns, the forest floor soft and damp beneath my feet. After about 10 minutes, I reached the power lines, a stark reminder of the civilization I was leaving behind. I paused, lighting a cigarette and taking a deep drag, trying to calm my nerves. On either side of me, the power lines stretched into the distance, offering a brief glimpse of the road beyond. Behind me lay my property, familiar and safe. In front of me, the forest loomed, dark and impenetrable. With a sigh, I pressed on, venturing deeper into the unknown. An hour and a half passed, the forest growing denser with every step. The sunlight struggled to penetrate the thick canopy of leaves, casting long, eerie shadows that danced and twisted around me. Just as I was about to turn back, I spotted something utterly unexpected. There, in the heart of the ancient woods, stood a house. A very old house. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "Oh, come on!" I yelled, my voice echoing through the silent trees. The The sight of the house filled me with a sense of dread I couldn't explain. It was a small, dilapidated structure, its paint peeling, its windows boarded up, and its roof sagging under the weight of years of neglect. Despite my fear, curiosity gnawed at me. I had to see what was inside. Gripping my flashlight tightly, I approached the house cautiously. The front door hung open, creaking ominously in the wind. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The interior of the house was shrouded in darkness, the air thick with the smell of damp earth, decaying wood, and something else. Something faintly sweet and nauseating. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing a scene of utter decay. Dust motes danced in the stagnant air, and cobwebs hung like macabre decorations from the crumbling ceiling. The house appeared to be from the early 1950s, a single-story structure with a basement lurking below. I found myself in what was once a living room. A mold-ridden couch sagged against one wall, its upholstery ripped and stained. A coffee table lay overturned, its legs splintered. In the corner, a vintage television set, its screen cracked and covered in grime, stood like a silent sentinel. The sight sent a shiver down my spine. Everything was coated in a thick layer of dust and grime, as if time had stood still within these walls. I moved cautiously into the next room, a kitchen. Here, the decay was even more pronounced. Dirty dishes were piled high on the counter, remnants of long-forgotten meals clinging to their surfaces. The fridge, a rounded, yellowing relic from the 50s, was caked in dust. A broken window offered a sliver of light, illuminating the scene with an eerie glow. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached the kitchen table. Plates with the petrified remains of half-century-old food were scattered across its surface, as if the residents had simply vanished mid-meal. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I had to fight the urge to vomit. I peered into the cupboards, finding faded cans of non-perishable food in jars filled with unidentifiable, blackened substances. With trembling hands, I opened the fridge. The sight that greeted me made my stomach churn. Maggot-ridden food and ancient, congealed beer filled the shelves. I slammed the door shut, the flimsy plastic handle snapping off in my hand. Despite the growing sense of dread, I couldn't shake the morbid fascination that compelled me forward. I moved past the kitchen into a narrow hallway. 3 doors lined the walls, one of them leading down to the basement. The basement door was reinforced with multiple locks, a sight that sent a fresh wave of fear through me. There was no way I was going down there. The first door I opened led to a bathroom. It was a scene of utter dilapidation. The toilet was smashed, the bathtub stained and rusted, and the mirror cracked, reflecting a distorted image of my own terrified face. A roll of ancient, yellowed toilet paper lay on the floor, disintegrating into dust. The next room was a bedroom, equally decrepit. 2 small beds with rusted frames stood against one wall, a pile of moldy stuffed animals huddled in the corner. A beat-up dresser occupied the space between the beds, its drawers hanging open, revealing rotted clothes and decaying toys. A small, broken window cast an eerie light on the scene. I approached the closet, my heart pounding in my chest. Inside, I found more rotted boxes and decaying clothes, the stench of mildew heavy in the air. The final room was the master bedroom. As I pushed the door open, it fell from its hinges, crashing to the floor with a loud bang that echoed through the silent house. My flashlight beam swept across the room, revealing a vanity with a broken mirror and a bed. And on that bed, a human skeleton. A scream tore from my lungs. The skeleton lay sprawled across the mattress, its clothes tattered and decayed, its skull shattered into fragments. A rusty gun lay on the floor nearby. My eyes darted to the closet, drawn by an inexplicable force. In front of the closet, two smaller skeletons lay huddled together, their bones brittle with age, their skulls sharing the same gruesome fate as the first. Frozen with terror, I couldn't tear my gaze away. I had to see what was in the closet. With trembling legs, I approached, shining my flashlight into the dark depths. Another skeleton. This one hung from the ceiling, its bones broken and disjointed, the tattered remains of a rope dangling from its neck. The sight was too much. I stumbled back, my stomach churning, bile rising in my throat. As I turned to flee, a loud banging erupted from the basement door. I froze, my blood turning to ice. Then, a man's voice, filled with rage and despair, screamed in my ear, "Get the fuck out now! Get out! Get out! Get out!" I didn't need to be told twice. I sprinted out of the house, my heart pounding like a drum, my lungs burning. I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of my own home, slamming the door shut and collapsing against it, gasping for breath. The crisp autumn air whipped through my hair as Emily and I ventured deeper into the woods of Northern California. It was supposed to be a fun adventure, a chance to explore a new hiking trail recommended by Emily's boyfriend. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the forest floor, a sense of unease settled over me. We had been hiking for about an hour, the trail winding through a dense thicket of towering redwoods and Douglas firs. The air was thick with the scent of pine needles and damp earth, and the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional chirping of crickets. As we rounded a bend in the trail, I noticed something strange, a series of symbols etched into the bark of a nearby tree. They were a chilling mix of geometric shapes and abstract patterns, unlike anything I had ever seen before. A shiver ran down my spine, and I exchanged a nervous glance with Emily. "What do you think those are?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rustling leaves. I shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "I don't know," I replied, my voice betraying a hint of trepidation. "Maybe some kind of trail markers?" But deep down, I knew that these symbols were something more sinister. They emanated an aura of ancient power, a primal energy that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. We continued along the trail, the symbols becoming more frequent and elaborate. They were carved into trees, rocks, even the forest floor itself. It was as if we were walking through a hidden world, a place where ancient secrets were whispered on the wind. The sun had almost completely disappeared below the horizon, and the forest was growing darker with each passing minute. The shadows deepened, stretching out like long, skeletal fingers reaching for us. Suddenly, we heard a sound that made our blood run cold, a low, guttural chanting echoing through the trees. It was a sound that seemed to come from the depths of the earth, a primal rhythm that vibrated through our very bones. Fear gripped us, and we exchanged a terrified look. We knew we had stumbled upon something dangerous, something we were not meant to see. "We need to get out of here," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded in agreement, and we turned to retrace our steps. But it was too late. A group of figures emerged from the shadows, their faces obscured by dark hoods and grotesque masks. They moved with an eerie grace, their black robes billowing in the wind like the wings of nocturnal birds. We froze, our hearts pounding in our chests. The chanting grew louder, the figures closing in on us like predators stalking their prey. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Emily's hand and pulling her along the trail. We sprinted through the trees, branches whipping at our faces and thorns tearing at our clothes. The chanting grew louder, the figures gaining on us. We stumbled and fell, scrambling to our feet again, adrenaline coursing through our veins. We had to escape, to get away from this nightmare. Ahead, we saw a faint light flickering through the trees. A cabin, its windows glowing with a warm, inviting light. We raced towards it, our lungs burning, our legs aching. We burst through the cabin door, slamming it shut behind us and bolting it. We collapsed on the floor, gasping for breath, our bodies trembling with fear. We had escaped, for now. But we knew that the cultists were still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for us to make our next move. The cabin was small and cramped, with a single room that served as both living area and bedroom. A fireplace crackled in the corner, casting a flickering light that danced across the rough-hewn walls. Dust motes swirled in the air, illuminated by the firelight, and a thick layer of grime coated every surface. Emily and I huddled together on a threadbare couch, our bodies trembling with fear. We listened intently for any sound from outside, any indication that the cultists had found us. But the only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the pounding of our own hearts. After what felt like an eternity, we finally dared to peek through a crack in the boarded-up window. The clearing was empty. The cultists had vanished, swallowed by the oppressive darkness as if they had never been there at all. Relief washed over us, but it was quickly replaced by a gnawing fear. We were still trapped in the woods, miles from civilization, with no way to contact the outside world. We decided to wait until dawn before attempting to make our escape. We huddled together for warmth, our eyes darting nervously around the dimly lit cabin. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside, sent a jolt of fear through us. As the first rays of dawn filtered through the gaps in the boarded-up windows, we finally dared to venture outside. The forest was still and silent, the only sound the gentle chirping of birds. We followed the trail back the way we had come, our eyes scanning the trees for any sign of the cultists. But there was nothing. It was as if the entire terrifying encounter had been a figment of our imaginations. We finally reached the clearing where we had parked our car, relief flooding through us. We climbed inside, eager to escape the woods and return to the safety of civilization. As we drove away, I glanced back at the forest, its dark silhouette looming against the rising sun. A shiver ran down my spine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the cultists were still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their next victims. The incident left an indelible mark on both Emily and me. We never went hiking in those woods again, and the memory of that night continued to haunt us for years to come. The letter we received months later only served to amplify our fear. The chilling message, scrawled in a messy, almost illegible hand, sent shivers down our spines. We knew that we were not safe, that the cultists were still out there, watching us, waiting for their opportunity to strike. We took precautions, installing security cameras and taking self-defense classes. But the fear never truly left us. It lingered in the shadows, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the edge of our perception. Years passed, and we eventually moved away from the area, hoping to leave the terrifying memories behind. But the incident continued to haunt us, a chilling reminder of the hidden dangers that lurked in the shadows of the world, waiting to be unleashed. The encounter with the cult had changed us, forever altering our perception of the world and our place in it. We had glimpsed the darkness that lay hidden beneath the surface of reality, and we knew that we would never be the same again. "Did you know," I began, my voice barely above a whisper, "that early astronomers thought there were oceans on the moon?" I glanced up from the worn leather-bound book in my lap, its pages filled with cryptic symbols and faded script. My mother shifted in her bed, a rustle of starched hospital sheets and the clinking of 4 tubes accompanying her movement. "Of course, dear," she replied, her voice thin and raspy. "The moon, with its silvery glow and mysterious shadows, seems like the perfect place to hold an ocean, doesn't it?" "It does," I agreed, a shiver running down my spine despite the warmth of the hospital room. "Those false seas, astronomers called them Maria." A faint smile flickered across Mom's pale lips. "How sweet of them," she murmured, her eyes twinkling with a touch of mischief, "to name the moon's oceans after me." "Well, they didn't find any oceans, did they?" I reminded her gently. "Maybe they just didn't look hard enough," she countered, a soft chuckle escaping her lips. Even in her weakened state, her laughter held a spark of defiance, a refusal to surrender to the darkness that encroached upon her. For all the pain she was in, all the fear that must have gnawed at her, my mother always had the kind of laugh that could light a candle. A laugh that could chase away the shadows that gathered in the corners of the room, the shadows that seemed to deepen with each passing day. We were in her hospital room, the same sterile, white-walled room we'd been in and out of for the past year and a half. A room that smelled of antiseptic and stale air, a room where the only sounds were the rhythmic beeping of machines and the hushed whispers of nurses. Cancer. It was such a mundane word for something so insidious, so relentlessly cruel. I'd noticed that medicine often did that, cloaking horror in clinical language, like a shroud over a corpse. Malignant. Inoperable. Metastasized. Terminal. The words echoed in my mind, each one a hammer blow to my dwindling hope. But when she laughed, we weren't in the hospital anymore. We were home, in the cozy living room with the crackling fireplace, surrounded by the familiar scent of Mom's baking and the comforting sounds of her humming. When she laughed, she wasn't sick. She was young again, and I was a kid, and the world was a bright, boundless expanse waiting to be explored. What a miracle my mother was. Cancer had ravaged her body, stealing her strength and vitality, but it could never extinguish the light within her. That was hers to keep, a beacon in the encroaching darkness. "How are we feeling today?" Maria? Dr. Evans asked, his voice gentle but weary. He came in less and less often these days. We all sensed this was the final stay, the last act in a play that had dragged on for far too long. Just brilliant, Doctor, Mom replied, her voice a mere thread of its former strength. She struggled to sit up a little straighter, her thin frame almost swallowed by the white pillows. We can still go dancing later if you'd like. Though I'll have to ask for my son's blessing. Ever since his father died, Alex has been very protective of me. I forced a stern expression onto my face, attempting to lighten the mood. I'll need to know your intentions are pure, Dr. Evans, I said, my voice cracking slightly. As the driven snow, he played along, a sad smile touching his lips. But I might need a rain check on that dance, Mrs. Walker. I'm not as young as I used to be. He emphasized his age, running a hand through his thinning gray hair. Mom tapped her bare scalp, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Right there with you, Tiger, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Dr. Evans chuckled, but I could see the burden in his eyes, the weight of knowing that he could do no more. I saw him glance at the small idol I'd placed on my mother's nightstand. The talisman was a miniature oak tree carved from gray soapstone, its branches gnarled and twisted. Four faces were etched into the trunk, each one contorted in a different expression of anguish. The face closest to my mother's bed wore a serene smile, while the one facing the door snarled menacingly, as if warding off evil spirits. The other two faces wept openly, their tears frozen in stone. The talisman was unsettling, even to me. It emanated an aura of ancient power, a primal energy that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. But I clung to the hope that it might offer some protection, some respite from the relentless advance of the disease. Dr. Evans sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. It's the stone tree, isn't it? He said, his voice barely above a whisper. I've seen things like that before, in families with histories. He trailed off, unable to articulate the unspoken, the unsettling truth that lingered in the air. I nodded slowly. My grandmother, she was different. There were stories, whispers of strange happenings, unexplained events. I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to the doctor, a man of science and reason. There's a box of her things in the attic. I thought, maybe there was something in there that could help. Dr. Evans looked at me with a mixture of pity and concern. Alex, he began, his voice gentle, I understand your desperation, but sometimes we have to accept that there are things beyond our control, forces beyond our understanding. I met his gaze, my own eyes filled with a stubborn defiance. I can't just give up, I said, my voice hoarse. I won't. Dr. Evans nodded slowly. I know you won't, he said softly. But please, Alex, be careful. Don't lose yourself in the darkness. He left then, leaving me alone with my thoughts, my fears, and the unsettling presence of the soapstone idol. I turned back to my mother, her frail form barely visible beneath the white sheets. Her breathing was shallow, her skin pale and translucent. She looked like a porcelain doll, fragile and easily broken. Mom? I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. Can you hear me? Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes that were cloudy and distant. "Alex," she murmured, her voice a faint echo. "Is that you?" "It's me, Mom," I said, taking her hand in mine. It felt cold and papery, like a dried leaf. "I'm here." A faint smile touched her lips. "I saw the moon, Alex," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It was so beautiful, so close." "You were dreaming, Mom," I said, my voice cracking. "Just dreaming." She shook her head weakly. "No," she insisted. "It was real. I was there, on the moon, with the Maria." A shiver ran down my spine. The Maria. The lunar seas that didn't exist. "Mom," I began, my voice trembling, "there's no water on the moon." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a strange clarity. "There is now," she whispered. I saw it. An ocean made of tears. Her grip tightened on my hand, and then her eyes fluttered closed. Her breathing grew shallow, then ceased altogether. The heart monitor emitted a long, unbroken tone. My mother was gone. The sterile scent of the hospital room seemed to cling to me, a ghostly reminder of the life that had just slipped away. I stumbled out of the room, the hallway stretching before me like an endless tunnel. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh, cold light that seemed to amplify the emptiness inside me. Numbness enveloped me, a protective barrier against the crushing weight of grief. I moved through the motions of notifying the hospital staff, arranging for the release of my mother's body, making the necessary phone calls. Each task felt like a monumental effort, each word a struggle to form. Back at the house, the silence was deafening. The rooms that had once been filled with my mother's presence now echoed with emptiness. I wandered through the house, touching her belongings, inhaling the faint scent of her perfume that lingered on her clothes. Each object, each scent, was a sharp reminder of her absence. The attic beckoned, a repository of forgotten memories and hidden secrets. I climbed the creaking stairs, dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight that filtered through the grimy windows. The old wooden box sat in the corner, its contents a jumble of strange objects and cryptic writings. I opened the box, my fingers tracing the worn leather cover of the red book. Its pages were filled with handwritten notes, diagrams, and spells, a testament to my grandmother's eccentric beliefs. I flipped through the pages, searching for answers, for a way to make sense of the events that had transpired. One passage caught my attention, its words scrawled in a hurried, almost frantic hand. "The veil thins on the eve of All Hallows' Eve, a time when the boundaries between worlds blur, a time of heightened power, a time of great risk. All Hallows' Eve. Halloween. The night when the dead were said to walk among the living." A chilling thought took root in my mind. What if my mother's death wasn't a natural end, but a passage to another realm? What if her spirit was trapped, unable to find its way? The soapstone idol sat on the attic floor, its four faces seeming to mock my grief. I picked it up, its cold, smooth surface sending a shiver down my spine. The weeping faces seemed to stare back at me, their tears a reflection of my own sorrow. Driven by a desperate hope, I decided to perform the ritual described in the Red Book, a ritual intended to guide lost souls to their final resting place. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but I had nothing left to lose. On Halloween night, I gathered the necessary items: candles, incense, herbs, and the soapstone idol. The air crackled with anticipation, a sense of unseen forces gathering around me. I followed the instructions in the book, my voice trembling as I recited the ancient words. The candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The incense smoke curled upwards, filling the room with a cloying sweetness. And then, a cold wind swept through the attic, extinguishing the candles and sending a chill down my spine. A presence filled the room, an unseen entity that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I could feel its eyes upon me, cold and ancient. "Maria," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Mom, are you there?" A whisper answered me, a voice that seemed to come from the very walls of the house. "Alex." My heart pounded in my chest. "Mom?" "I'm here," the voice whispered again. "But I can't stay." "Where are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What's happening?" I'm on the moon," she replied, her voice fading in and out. "There's an ocean here, made of tears." Tears streamed down my face. "Mom, come back," I pleaded. "Please come back." "I can't," she whispered. "It's too late." "No!" I cried out, my voice filled with anguish. "Don't leave me." But the voice was gone, swallowed by the silence of the attic. The only sound was the beating of my own heart, a frantic drumbeat against the backdrop of emptiness. I sank to the floor, the soapstone idol clutched in my hand. The weeping faces seemed to mock my grief, their tears a constant reminder of my loss. The Red Book lay open on the floor, its pages filled with cryptic symbols and unfulfilled promises. I closed the book, its leather cover cold against my skin. The attic was silent, the air heavy with the weight of unanswered questions and unfulfilled hopes. I left the attic, the darkness closing in behind me. The house was empty, the silence broken only by the creaking of the floorboards beneath my feet. I wandered through the rooms, each one a tomb of memories. Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it the scent of fallen leaves and the distant echo of my mother's laughter. I looked up at the moon, its pale light casting long shadows across the yard. Somewhere, in the vast expanse of the lunar landscape, my mother was walking among the Maria, her tears mingling with the stardust. And I was left behind, alone in the darkness, haunted by the echoes of a love that could never be extinguished. The crisp autumn air whipped through the trees, sending a shiver down my spine. It was the start of October, the leaves turning vibrant shades of red and gold, but a sense of unease hung heavy in the air. This wasn't just the usual pre-Halloween spookiness, this was different. This was a bad year. I'm Kate, and I run a campground nestled deep in the woods. It's a beautiful place, but it has a dark side. The land is old, steeped in a history that intertwines with the supernatural. Most years, it's manageable. We deal with the occasional mischievous spirit or lost soul, nothing we can't handle. But every few years, something shifts. The veil between worlds thins, and the creatures that lurk in the shadows grow bolder. This year, it started with the spiders. Not just any spiders, mind you, but grotesque, zombie-like creatures that crawled out from the depths of the forest. They swarmed a young police officer, their bites leaving festering wounds that refused to heal. The doctors were baffled, the treatments useless. He was fading fast, and we were all helpless to stop it. Desperate, I turned to the only source of knowledge I knew, the strange and often terrifying inhabitants of the deep woods. There's the man with the skull cup, a creature of immense power who demands a heavy price for his aid. There's the lady with extra eyes, bound by chains and shrouded in mystery. And then there are the dancers, ethereal beings who flit through the trees, their motives as elusive as their forms. My first encounter was with the man with the skull cup. He agreed to help, but his price was steep, a piece of my land, a piece of my soul. Desperate to save the young officer, I agreed, sealing a pact that I would soon come to regret. His solution was as bizarre as it was gruesome. He instructed me to capture the spiders, grind them into a paste, and feed them to the officer. It was a revolting task, but I carried it out, my stomach churning with every bite I forced down the poor man's throat. For a while, it seemed to work. The officer stabilized, the spiders retreating from his body. But the relief was short-lived. The spiders returned, more numerous and aggressive than before. The man with the skull cup had tricked me, his solution a temporary reprieve at best. Now, I was left with a broken promise, a dying officer, and a growing sense of dread. The spiders were just the beginning. I knew, deep in my gut, that something far worse was coming. And I was running out of time to stop it. The spider situation was getting worse. They weren't just crawling out of the woods anymore. They were appearing in the cabins, in the showers, even in the campers' food. Panic was spreading through the campground faster than a wildfire. I needed a new plan, and fast. The man with the skull cup was out of the question. He'd already taken his payment, and I doubted he'd be interested in further negotiations. That left the lady with extra eyes and the dancers. But the lady was bound by those strange chains, her power seemingly limited. And the dancers, well, they were unpredictable, their motives shrouded in mystery. I decided to seek out the lady with extra eyes. Her cabin was hidden deep within the woods, a place of twisted trees and unsettling silence. As I approached, I noticed something strange. The chains that had once bound her were gone. She stood before me, her eyes, all 12 of them, fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. She spoke, her voice a low, raspy whisper that seemed to echo through the trees. "You seek my help," she stated, her tone devoid of emotion. I explained the situation, the escalating spider infestation, the fear gripping the campground. She listened patiently, her numerous eyes blinking in unison. "The spiders are a symptom," she finally said, "not the cause." She explained that the land itself was out of balance, the natural order disrupted. Something was stirring in the depths of the woods, something ancient and malevolent. The spiders were merely its harbingers. To restore balance, she said, the source of the disturbance had to be found and neutralized. but she couldn't do it alone. She needed my help. I hesitated. Trusting the lady with extra eyes felt like a gamble, especially after my experience with the man with the skull cup. But I had no other choice. The campground, my home, was on the verge of collapse. She led me deeper into the woods, to a place where the trees grew thick and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The air was heavy with an oppressive energy that made it difficult to breathe. We arrived at a clearing where a towering oak tree stood, its trunk scarred and twisted. The lady explained that this was the heart of the disturbance, the source of the unnatural energy that was plaguing the land. She handed me a small, silver knife, its blade gleaming in the dim light. "You must strike the tree," she instructed, "and draw its blood." I raised the knife, my hand trembling. As the blade pierced the bark, a dark, viscous liquid oozed out, staining the ground a deep crimson. The air crackled with energy, and I felt a surge of power coursing through me. Suddenly, the ground shook, and the tree groaned in agony. From its depths, a creature emerged, its form shifting and grotesque. It was a monstrosity, a fusion of spider and human, its eyes glowing with malevolent intent. The lady and I fought side by side, our combined strength barely holding back the creature's fury. Just when I thought we were about to be overwhelmed, the creature let out a piercing shriek and collapsed, its body dissolving into dust. The ground stilled, the air cleared, and a sense of peace settled over the woods. The lady turned to me, her expression unreadable. "The balance has been restored," she said, her voice echoing through the trees. "But the fight is not over. The land is still vulnerable, and there are others who would seek to exploit its power." I knew she was right. The spiders were gone, but the threat remained. I had a responsibility to protect this land, this campground, from the forces that sought to destroy it. And I wouldn't rest until I had ensured its safety. It was a cold December night. The kind of night where the wind howls like a banshee and the bare branches of trees scratch against your windows like skeletal fingers. I was home alone, my husband out of town on business. I had just let my dog, Sparky, in from the backyard when I heard a loud bang on the back door. I jumped, my heart pounding in my chest. I peeked through the blinds, but I couldn't see anyone. I tried to shake it off, but then I heard the doorknob jiggling. I quickly locked the door and called 911. The operator told me to stay inside and keep the doors locked. I did as I was told, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. A few hours later, I was lying in bed, trying to sleep, when Sparky started growling. I looked up and saw a face peering in through my bedroom window. It was a pale, white face with no eyelids and a wide, grotesque smile. I screamed and Sparky barked, and the face disappeared. I called 911 again, my voice trembling. The operator told me to stay calm and that the police were on their way. I locked myself in my bedroom and waited. The police arrived a few minutes later, but they couldn't find any sign of the intruder. They told me to keep my doors locked and to call back if I saw anything else. I tried to go back to sleep, but I was too terrified. I kept imagining that face at my window, that smile that seemed to stretch from ear to ear. I felt like I was being watched, hunted. A few hours later, I heard it tapping on my bedroom window. I looked up and there it was again, that pale, white face with no eyelids and that grotesque smile. I screamed and ran out of the room, Sparky at my heels. I ran downstairs and locked myself in the bathroom. I could hear the intruder moving around in the house. I was trapped. I heard a noise coming from the air vent. I looked up and saw that face staring back at me. It was smiling, mouthing words I couldn't understand. I screamed and grabbed the towel bar, ready to fight for my life. But it was too late. The intruder reached out from the vent, its long, skeletal fingers wrapping around my throat. I struggled, but it was no use. The last thing I saw was that grotesque smile before everything went black. The police arrived a few minutes later to find my front door wide open. They found Sparky in the laundry room, whimpering and staring at the air vent. There were traces of white makeup on all the windows and inside the vents. They found blood and hair samples in the vents, along with fingernails embedded in one of the grates. The police investigated, but they never found my body. I vanished without a trace. They called the case the December Stalker because of the time of year and the chilling way the intruder stalked his victims. Some people say the December Stalker is still out there, hiding in the shadows, waiting to strike again. They say that if you hear a tapping on your window on a cold December night, you should never look up. Because if you do, you might just see his face, pale and white with no eyelids and a grotesque smile, staring back at you. My buddy, Mark, and I headed up to Letchworth State Park in western New York one July weekend. We heard all about this Grand Canyon of the East with its massive gorges and stunning waterfalls, and we were eager to check it out for ourselves. We spent the day hiking and exploring the park's 17-mile expanse, and it definitely lived up to the hype. Too bad we only lasted one night in our cabin. We booked one of the D cabins, these small, one-room lodges tucked away in a secluded corner of the park. Most of the tourists stuck to the western side of the Genesee River Gorge, so we practically had the whole cluster of cabins to ourselves. As we were unpacking our car, a couple from a neighboring cabin was loading up theirs, and they were kind enough to offer us a parting gift, a watermelon. They seemed to be in a hurry, though, so we didn't chat for long. Once they left, there were only 2 other occupied cabins, but they were far enough away that we barely saw those folks during our stay. Eager to explore, we hit the trails as soon as we'd unloaded the car. On our way to the trailhead, we stumbled across a deserted Civil War parade field with a lone cannon and a weathered memorial. It was strange to see such an empty, desolate area in a popular state park, especially in July. I joked that the place must be haunted by Civil War ghosts. Mark, always up for a spooky adventure, suggested we come back at night to see for ourselves. The hike itself was a blast. We made our way down to the river canyon and eventually crossed over to the western side to check out one of the waterfalls. By the time we got back to our cabin that evening, twilight was setting in. We played some card games, scarfed down some sandwiches, and then set up our cots. The cabin was basically the size of a kitchen, a small stove and fridge, a tiny table with 2 chairs, and those 2 rollaway cots. Once they were unfolded, there was barely any room to move around. Scratched into the log walls were tons of names and dates from past occupants. Friends, lovers, vandals, they'd all left their mark, some going as far back as the 70s. Mark and I weren't the type to carve our names into the place, though. "Whoa, check that out, a pentagram," Mark said, pointing at the wall. I went over to take a closer look. There were some symbols around it I didn't recognize. It definitely stood out, since all the other carvings seemed to be either lovey-dovey stuff or just people marking their visit. "Great, we're staying in the Devil's Cabin," I said with a grin. Mark just shrugged it off, and we went back to our card game and a few drinks. "Hey, how about we crack open that watermelon?" Mark suggested. "With what?" I asked. There wasn't a single knife or utensil in the whole cabin. "Good point," Mark said. "I think I've got my pocket knife in my bag." He pulled out his Swiss Army knife, and we spent the next 15 minutes wrestling with that tiny blade, trying to cut through the thick rind. Finally, we managed to pry the melon in half. "Gross," Mark exclaimed. The inside was a black, gooey mess. The rotten inside started oozing out onto the floor. It was like it liquefied the second it hit the air. "Quick, toss it," I yelled. We both heaved our halves of the stinking, dripping mess out the cabin door. It was a uniquely disgusting rot, this sweet, sickly stench of decay. We cleaned up the floor, laughing at the gift our neighbors had left us. Then we got back to our game, but it wasn't long before we were both nodding off. We decided to call it a night. It was still pretty early, but it was dark, and we were exhausted from all the hiking. I fell asleep right away and slept soundly for hours until I was jolted awake by a pounding on the cabin door. Honestly, it was more like someone was trying to shake the whole cabin, not just knock. It was pitch black inside and out, and with the small fan whirring in the window right next to my head, I could barely hear anything else. I got up, glanced over at Mark, who was still out cold, and checked my phone. 2:30 a.m. A shiver ran down my spine. Who would be knocking at this hour? I was tense, but not exactly scared yet. I'd been camping enough times to know that sometimes park rangers or attendants would make late-night rounds. Maybe someone was lost, or maybe, and this was the annoying kind, we'd somehow pitched our tents too close together, even though we booked adjoining campsites so we could be near each other. I flipped on the outside light, unlocked the door, and slowly cracked it open. I was only in my boxers and a t-shirt, so I felt a bit awkward when I saw it was an old woman standing there. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to get a good look at her face, but it was mostly hidden in the shadows. She had a hunchback and long, scraggly gray hair tucked into a green army jacket. She held something up, and I realized she was offering it to me. "I have an extra cantaloupe. Would you like it?" I was speechless. Was she serious? Waking me up at this ungodly hour to offer me a cantaloupe? I figured she must be a bit off her rocker. Wanting to just get back to sleep, I mumbled that I'd take it and opened the door just enough to grab the fruit. "Enjoy," she said. I thanked her, shut the door, and peeked out the window to make sure she was leaving. Once she disappeared into the night, I turned off the light, tossed the cantaloupe onto the stove, and crawled back into bed. But sleep wouldn't come. I kept picturing the old woman lurking just outside, watching the cabin. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying the strange encounter with the old woman. The Ketty murders kept flashing through my head, that gruesome unsolved case where a family was brutally murdered in a California cabin while their neighbors slept, oblivious to the horror unfolding next door. I wondered if Mark would even wake up if this old lady decided to stab me through the door instead of offering me fruit. A few mosquitoes and moths had gotten into the cabin, and I swatted at them in the darkness, both real and imagined. I couldn't stretch out fully without my feet hitting the wall, and the thought of creepy crawlies getting easy access to me in my sleep made my skin crawl. But exhaustion eventually won out, and I drifted back off. I don't know how long I slept, but it was still pitch black when I woke up again. This time, it was a man's voice that roused me. At first, I couldn't make out what he was saying. It sounded like he was far away. But as I got up to peek out the window, I realized with a jolt that he was standing right outside the door. I couldn't see him clearly, but I could hear him muttering, not quite whispering, but speaking in hushed tones. The fan made it hard to understand what he was saying, but the whole situation felt way too creepy to just confront him. I woke Mark up. What? Mark's eyes flew open in the faint light filtering in from the moon and the distant bathroom building. I think there's some guy outside, talking to himself, I whispered urgently. Ha! What time is it? He sat up, sensing my fear. It's after 3, maybe closer to 4. I don't know, I said. An old lady came by about an hour ago and knocked on the door. Now this guy's out there. Turn on the light, Mark said, his voice tense. I leaned over the table and flipped both switches, illuminating the cabin's interior and the space outside. Mark got up and went to the door, cracking it open. What's going on? Why are you here so late? He demanded. Mark blocked my view, so I couldn't see who he was talking to. No! We don't want that, Mark said firmly. We want to get some rest. It's the middle of the night. I heard a muffled response, then Mark slammed the door shut. What did he want? I asked, my heart pounding. Mark turned off the outside light. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide with fear. It wasn't a man, he said, his voice barely a whisper. It was an old lady. An old lady? I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. But I heard a man's voice. Mark's face was ashen. It was definitely an old woman. The same one who gave you the cantaloupe. She gave me a cantaloupe. My words trailed off as I turned towards the stove. The cantaloupe I'd left there was now cracked open, covered in a dark, pulsating mold. Tiny worms and larvae swarmed over its putrid flesh. Oh, that's nasty, dude. Mark gagged, his eyes white with disgust. Why would you even bring that thing inside? It wasn't like that when I took it. I grabbed a plastic shopping bag, scooped up the revolting cantaloupe, and flung it out the door before quickly locking it again. We huddled over the table, our breaths shallow and rapid. What did she say to you? I asked, my voice trembling. I couldn't hear anything over the fan. Mark swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on some unseen point beyond me. She said something about living in this cabin during the off-season, and then she tried to hand me a knife. A knife? I gasped. What for? She wanted me to take it, Mark said, his voice barely a whisper. She said I didn't have one big enough to cut my friend's melon. A cold dread washed over me. The cryptic words, the rotten fruit, the late-night visits, it all felt connected, part of some sinister ritual. We stayed awake the rest of the night, huddled together, every creak and groan of the cabin sending shivers down our spines. As soon as dawn broke, we packed up our things and fled the devil's cabin, never looking back. We haven't been camping since. The old shoebox felt cold in my hands. It had been 2 years since I last touched it, 2 years since my father's death, 2 years since the detective handed me the suicide note and that chilling Ziploc bag. 2 years of hospitals, therapists, and a fog of grief so thick I could barely breathe. But tonight, something had shifted. I was ready. I slid the note out of its envelope. The familiar blue lines of the paper seemed to mock me. My dad. He always used those cheap notebooks. Aaron, it began, in a handwriting that was almost, but not quite, his. I want you to know that I'm sorry and that none of this is your fault. The words blurred as a wave of nausea washed over me. My dad. Gone. He'd been everything, my coach, my confidant, my protector. Mom had vanished when I was a baby, swallowed by the darkness of addiction, leaving just me and Dad against the world. He'd always said we were a team. But what kind of team was this? A team where he left me with a note full of lies? Because that's what it was. A lie. He wrote about Mom's death. But Mom hadn't died. She just left. That's what he always told me. And then there was the handwriting. It was close, so close, but off. The way he formed his ES, the slant of the letters. It was like looking at a ghost of his writing, a twisted imitation. Panic clawed at my throat. Who wrote this? Why? Was it possible? Was it possible Dad hadn't written it at all? I flew to the closet, pulling out old birthday cards, notes he'd left on the fridge. Each one was in his bold, familiar hand, each E sharp and precise. None of them matched the wavering script of the suicide note. My blood ran cold. Had my dad been murdered? I had to tell someone. Uncle Dan. He'd always been there, a steady presence in the chaos after Dad's death. But when I showed him the note, his face tightened. Aaron, he said, his voice strained, I thought we were past this. Have you been taking your medication? Medication. Therapy. They'd been trying to convince me I was crazy, that my grief was warping my reality. But I wasn't crazy. I knew what I saw. I retreated to my room, locking the door. My eyes fell on a discarded post-it note on Dan's desk. Pick up prescription for Aaron. The E was curved, just like in the note. Dan. Hours crawled by, Every creak of the old house sounded like a footstep, every whisper of the wind a voice. I was trapped in a nightmare, the walls closing in. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know the truth. I dialed the number on the detective's card, the one I kept tucked away for 2 years. Detective Tilly, a voice answered. I think my uncle killed my dad, I blurted out, the words tumbling over each other. There was a silence, then, where are you, Aaron? She believed me. Relief washed over me, so intense it almost brought me to my knees. But before I could answer, a voice cut through the quiet. Going somewhere, Aaron? Dan. He was standing in the doorway, his face a mask of fury. He lunged, and I scrambled away, the phone clattering to the floor. He grabbed my backpack, the one I'd packed with the note and the evidence. We wrestled, the strap tearing under his grip. Then I remembered Dad's voice, years ago, teaching me how to defend myself. Aim for the groin, Aaron. It'll give you time to run. I kicked out with all my might. Dan howled, collapsing. I sprinted for the window, flinging it open and tumbling into the darkness. He was right behind me. I ran, but a sharp pain exploded in my head, and the world went black. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. Dan was in jail. Detective Tilly told me the whole story. Mom's overdose. The cover-up. Dad's guilt. Dan's desperation. It was a horror story, a Halloween tale come to life. But I had survived. And as I finally drifted off to sleep, I knew Dad was with me. We were a team again, and even the shadows couldn't touch us now. It started with a lie. A lie coated in candy corn and shrouded in fake cobwebs. Every Halloween night, for as long as I can remember, my parents drugged us. They called them spooky potions, foul-tasting liquids that guaranteed we'd be dead asleep by the time trick-or-treating ended. As a kid, I believed the story. The costumes, the jack-o'-lanterns, the eerie decorations, it was all part of the fun of Halloween. But as I got older, the fear behind the facade started to creep in. By middle school, the whispers about haunted houses and creepy creatures seemed a little too real. So why the potions? My friends just shrugged when I asked. Spooky potions, they'd say, rolling their eyes. That's when I knew something was wrong, that our Halloween tradition wasn't normal. Last year, I decided to find out the truth. I pretended to drink the potion, waited for my parents to fall asleep, and then crept out of bed. The house was eerily silent, the only sound the wind whistling through the bare branches outside. But that wasn't what chilled me to the bone. It was the things on the roof. Giant, black, spidery creatures, crawling across the moonlit houses, slipping down chimneys one by one. I watched in horror as they emerged from the Petersons' chimney, dragging little Emily with them. Her screams pierced the night, a sound that still echoes in my nightmares. I knew then why my parents drugged us. It wasn't about Halloween fun. It was about survival. Halloween morning was a blur. Relief washed over me as I woke up in my own bed, safe and sound. But the joy was short-lived. The Petersons were gone. Emily had vanished. And no one seemed to care. Weeks turned into months, and the fear gnawed at me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus. The thought of those creatures, those Halloween horrors, haunted my every waking moment. My friends noticed. They staged an intervention, a smoke session behind the school. I finally broke down, spilling the truth about the potions, the creatures, Emily's disappearance. They were skeptical at first, but then Ashley and Craig realized their families had similar traditions. We were all being drugged, kept safe from the creatures that stalked the night on Halloween. But why? Why our town? Why the silence? And what happened to the people they took? We started digging, searching for answers. Obituaries with scant details, families that vanished without a trace, a town shrouded in secrecy. It was like a collective amnesia had fallen over everyone, a deliberate forgetting of the horrors that lurked in the shadows. Then, one crisp autumn day, we met Rose. An old woman, her house a fortress against the night, her eyes filled with the pain of a lost brother. She confirmed our fears, shared her own story of witnessing the creatures, of the empty graves and the missing loved ones. She gave us a glimpse into the history of our town, a dark legacy of sacrifices and silence. The creatures, she explained, always came in threes, one for each house. They took the first person they found awake, a grim offering to ensure the town's survival. Rose's words echoed in my mind as Halloween approached. The fear was back, stronger than ever. But this time, I wasn't alone. My friends, Ashley, Craig, and Michael, we were in this together. We wouldn't let another innocent life be taken. We would fight back. We spent weeks planning, researching, gathering supplies. We boarded up windows, reinforced doors, and set traps. We were ready for a war against the Halloween horrors. Halloween night arrived, and the tension was thick in the air. We waited, armed with makeshift weapons and a desperate hope. As the clock struck midnight, we heard the telltale clicking sound, the skittering on the roof, the rustle of leaves. The creatures were here. We held our breath as they descended the chimneys, one by one. But this year, they wouldn't find easy prey. We were awake, and we were ready. The fight was brutal, a desperate struggle against creatures that seemed to defy the laws of nature. But we fought with a ferocity born of fear and anger, and slowly, we started to gain the upper hand. We drove them back, those creatures of the night, their spidery limbs flailing, their black eyes glowing with rage. We chased them across the rooftops, through the leaf-strewn streets, until finally, they retreated, vanishing into the darkness. We had won. We had saved our town, broken the cycle of fear and sacrifice. But the victory came at a cost. We had seen the true face of Halloween, the darkness that lurked beneath the costumes and candy. And we would never be the same. As the sun rose on Halloween morning, we stood together, battered and bruised, but alive. We had faced the creatures and lived to tell the tale. And we knew that the Halloween horrors would never again terrorize our town. The oppressive humidity hung heavy in the air, the aftermath of a brutal derecho that had ripped through West Virginia, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. Trees lay sprawled like fallen giants, power lines dangled precariously, and the air crackled with an eerie stillness. With the power out and the mercury soaring, I decided to escape the sweltering confines of our home and venture into the woods behind our house. My wife, Emily, opted to stay back with our little girl, Lily, content to splash around in the kiddie pool and avoid the stifling heat. As I laced up my hiking boots, Emily rushed in, her face etched with worry. "Jake," she said, her voice trembling, "I think I just saw someone lurking in the front yard. He looked like, well, like an FBI agent or something." Intrigued, I followed her outside, but a thorough search yielded nothing. No footprints, no rustling leaves, no sign of any intruder. "Are you sure, Em?" I asked, scanning the area around the towering pine tree she'd indicated. "I swear, Jake," she insisted, her eyes wide with fear. "He was right there, behind that broken branch." I saw his face clear as day. The branch in question was a good 4 feet above my head. I'm a tall guy, so whoever this agent was, he must have been exceptionally tall. Dismissing it as a case of storm-induced paranoia, I reassured Emily and headed out, eager to explore the woods and clear my head. The storm had wreaked havoc on the trails, making them nearly impassable. Yet, an inexplicable urge propelled me forward, compelling me to forge my own path through the dense undergrowth. I stumbled upon a clearing, where a wall of tangled branches and trees stood before me, an impenetrable barrier woven together by some unseen force. A shiver ran down my spine, and the air grew heavy with an oppressive dread. That's when I saw them, a pair of crimson eyes, gleaming with malevolent intensity from behind the tangled wall. They were inhuman, reptilian, filled with a chilling intelligence that sent a wave of fear washing over me. Blinking, I tried to focus, but the eyes vanished, leaving me to question my sanity. Driven by an insatiable curiosity, I cautiously approached the wall. A climbing vine, adorned with delicate white flowers, partially obscured a small, porcelain doll. Its limbs were elongated, its face eerily smooth and devoid of features. Attached to the doll was a white card, bearing a single, chilling word scrawled in black ink, "Beware." Below it, a crude drawing of the red-eyed face I had seen moments before. My heart pounded in my chest. Was this some elaborate prank by local kids, or something far more sinister? Determined not to let fear dictate my actions, I pressed on, convincing myself that I was merely succumbing to the same anxieties as Emily. I paused to rest on a moss-covered boulder, taking a long swig of water. As my heart rate slowed and my breathing steadied, I began to feel foolish for my earlier apprehension. It had to be a prank, I reasoned. But as I rose to continue my trek, a twig snapped behind me, shattering the silence. Whirling around, I came face to face with the FBI agent Emily had described. He stood at least 9 feet tall, his form shrouded in what appeared to be a dark suit. His face was a smooth, featureless mask, yet I felt the intensity of his gaze boring into me. A wave of terror, more profound than anything I had ever experienced, washed over me, rooting me to the spot. My eyes were drawn to the grotesque sight at his feet, a mass of blood and what looked like human entrails. Time seemed to stand still as I stood frozen, paralyzed by fear. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the paralysis lifted. Thinking fast, I fumbled for my phone, hoping to capture this horrifying apparition on camera. But as I raised the phone, the screen flickered with static, and the figure vanished into thin air. Relieved but shaken, I scrambled to my feet, only to realize I was completely lost. The wall of branches, the boulder, the trail, all gone. Panic surged through me as I stumbled through the unfamiliar terrain, the horrifying realization dawning that I might never see Emily and Lily again. Just in case, I typed a message on my phone, describing the monstrous being I had encountered and expressing my love for my family. Then, I slipped the phone back into my pocket and continued my desperate attempt to find my way back. But I wasn't alone. Strange noises echoed through the trees, and every time I turned, I caught a glimpse of that blank, emotionless stare from behind a tree or bush. Once, the tall man materialized mere feet away, his head tilting slowly, as if studying me. Tentacles, long and writhing, sprouted from his back, their tips dripping with an unknown viscous fluid. I screamed, my voice raw with terror. The next thing I knew, I was sitting against a tree, sobbing uncontrollably. My arms were covered in black ink, the word run scrawled repeatedly across my skin. And run I did. I ran with a primal fear I had never known, my lungs burning, my legs aching, but the terror fueling me onward. I burst into a clearing, stumbling and falling, only to find myself face to face with another creature, a porcelain white being with enormous moth-like wings and glowing red eyes. Before I could react, it lunged at me, throwing me behind it. I landed hard, scrambling to turn and face my attacker, but it wasn't me it was facing. The tall man stood behind me, tentacles writhing menacingly. The winged creature roared, a sound that seemed to shake the very ground beneath my feet. It was the same face I had seen earlier, the one that had warned me. It spread its wings, deflecting the tentacles with incredible speed and agility. Then, with a blinding flash of light, it grappled with the tall man, enveloping him in its wings. They ascended into the sky, vanishing into the swirling clouds. I collapsed, unconscious. When I awoke, I was just a few feet from my house, the sun setting on the horizon. The ink was gone from my arms, but my clothes were caked in mud, a testament to the horrors I had witnessed. Emily greeted me with a warm smile, oblivious to the ordeal I had endured. "Did you have fun in the woods, honey?" she asked. I forced a smile, determined to shield her from the terror that still clung to me. "The woods aren't for me," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. The woods whispered secrets that day. Secrets I wasn't meant to hear. I was hiking alone, lost in thought, when the emptiness came for me. It wasn't a creature, not exactly. More like a void where something should be. Where it moved, the leaves stopped rustling, the birds stopped singing. It was an absence of life, a chilling nothingness. And then it struck. I felt claws pierce me, not on my skin, but somewhere deeper, in the core of my being. I wasn't bleeding, but I was wounded. A piece of me was gone, stolen by the emptiness. The world felt hazy, muted. Days blurred into weeks, and I started noticing strange things. My neighbor's car changed color. My coworker's name wasn't Fred anymore, it was Dan. Everyone insisted it had always been Dan. Then, one morning, I was in my bathroom, and the next, I was standing in the middle of a busy street, still in my pajamas. People stared, horrified. I ran, the shame burning hot on my face. That's when I knew the emptiness was still with me, feeding on my life, stealing my memories. It had already eaten 3 months. 3 months of dates with Mary, the woman who made my heart sing. 3 months gone, vanished as if they never happened. I fought back. I clung to routine, to caffeine, to anything that kept me grounded in the present. But the emptiness was patient. It waited for me to slip, to let my guard down. And I did. One evening, lost in my favorite TV show, a little boy walked up to me and called me Daddy. My son. 2 years old. 2 years I'd lost, 2 years of firsts, of laughter, of love. Gone. Desperation clawed at me. I tried everything, priests, doctors, even psychics. No one believed me. They said I was stressed, delusional. But I knew the truth. The emptiness was real, and it was consuming me. One day, Mary came over. She was dressed up, excited for our second date. Our second date. It was happening again. The emptiness had reset time, stolen another chunk of my life. But this time, something was different. I wasn't absent from those missing months. I was there, but out of order. Like a puzzle with pieces scattered through time. I was living my life in fragments, a jumbled mess of memories. Years passed. I learned to navigate the chaos, to embrace the fragmented reality. I met my grandson, a bright young man who dreamed of becoming a writer. I even saw Mary grow old, her beauty fading, but her love for me burning bright. But the emptiness was growing stronger, the fragments of my life becoming smaller, the jumps more frequent. I was losing myself, piece by piece. One day, my grandson found me staring out the window, lost in the swirling snow. He showed me a box filled with papers, my papers. Pages and pages of notes, documenting my fragmented existence. He had found a pattern, a way to track the emptiness's path through my life. Hope flickered in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to fight back. We worked together, my grandson and I, building a machine, a weapon against the emptiness. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble. But it was all we had. The day came. I sat in the machine, my heart pounding. My grandson flipped the switch, and a jolt of electricity surged through me. Pain ripped through my body, but I saw it, the emptiness, a grotesque parasite attached to my soul. My grandson increased the voltage, and the parasite writhed, its grip weakening. Memories flooded back, vivid and whole. Mary's smile, my son's first steps, the joy and the pain, all of it. Then, silence. The emptiness was gone. I was whole again, my life restored. But the victory was bittersweet. Mary was gone, her time with me already lived, her death a fresh wound in my heart. The emptiness had taken her, but it had also given me a gift, the memories of a life lived out of order, a love that transcended time. And as I sat by the window, watching the snow fall, I knew that even though the emptiness had tried to steal my life, it had ultimately failed. My memories, my love, my fragmented existence, it was all still there, a part of me, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. The late October chill clung to the air as I ventured into the depths of Whispering Pines, my family's private campground. It was one of those bad years, when the veil between the natural and the supernatural seemed to thin, unleashing horrors I couldn't have imagined in my wildest nightmares. This time, it was spider zombies. It all started with Officer Miller, a regular at our campground. He'd been bitten by something in the woods, something that turned him into a living incubator for monstrous arachnids. The spiders were spreading, slowly but surely, and no one knew how to stop them. Desperate, I delved into our family archives, hoping to find some clue, some ancient remedy for this terrifying affliction. My brother, Ben, had unearthed a cryptic reference to a witch in the woods, buried beneath a tree by our ancestors. Was this some vengeful spirit, her power now manifesting in this spider plague? I had to find answers, and fast. But with Ben and his chaotic family visiting, my normally meticulous records were in disarray. The baby threw them everywhere, he'd claimed, a convenient excuse for his lack of organizational skills. So, armed with my trusty shotgun, a charm vest, don't ask, and a double-barreled can of industrial-strength spider spray, I ventured into the woods, seeking help from the supernatural entities that resided within. I hoped to enlist the aid of the ethereal dancers, but they were nowhere to be found. The enigmatic man with the skull cup was out of the question, his price too high to pay. That left the lady with extra eyes, a powerful being I'd once clashed with. As twilight painted the forest in hues of purple and orange, I stumbled upon a clearing bathed in an eerie glow. Bloodroot flowers, a beacon to the lady's dwelling, carpeted the ground. Her house, a quaint cabin with boarded-up windows, stood silent and ominous. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. The last time I'd seen her, she'd been bound in chains, a victim of a curse. Now, she was free, and I wasn't sure what to expect. I knocked, and the door creaked open. The lady stood before me, her face pale and drawn, her multitude of eyes filled with a weariness that mirrored my own. She wore the clothes I'd given her to break the curse, a stark reminder of our last encounter. "We can help you with the tree," I offered, gesturing to the fallen remains of the once human tree in her backyard. "Bury it, burn it, whatever you prefer." She remained silent, her gaze unwavering. I stepped inside, leaving my shotgun by the door as a gesture of goodwill. Or maybe it was just foolish optimism. "I'll take care of the tree," she said, her voice a low murmur. "You have more pressing matters." She brewed a pot of peppermint tea, the aroma filling the small cabin. We sat in silence, the tension hanging heavy in the air. Finally, I broached the subject of the spider zombies. "It's not my doing," she assured me, her eyes flickering with an unknown emotion. "But I can help." She handed me a cup of tea, its warmth spreading through my chilled fingers. "Drink this," she urged. "It will guide them out." Guide them out? Where? And how? The lady explained that the tea would force the spiders to leave Officer Miller's body, seeking an escape route. She would provide instructions, a gruesome ritual involving incisions and a desperate hope for survival. I felt a surge of gratitude, but it was quickly replaced by a gnawing suspicion. The lady with extra eyes was not known for her altruism. What was her game? I pressed her for answers, questioning her about the curse, the balance of the campground, the strange forces vying for control. She remained evasive, her words cryptic and unsettling. It's a shame, she finally sighed, that you'll have to die for someone else to claim this land. Die! My heart sank. Was this her plan all along? To eliminate me, seize control of Whispering Pines, and rule over the supernatural entities within? The realization hit me like a bolt of lightning. I was a pawn in a game far bigger than myself, a game with stakes higher than I could have ever imagined. As I stumbled towards the door, the lady's true form began to emerge. Spiders crawled from the cracks in the walls, from the shadows beneath the furniture, their clicking legs a chorus of impending doom. Her human facade crumbled, replaced by a monstrous creature with spider limbs and glowing eyes. I'm giving you a head start, she hissed, her voice dripping with malice. But you can't outrun your fate. I fled into the night, my heart pounding, the spider horde at my heels. The lady's words echoed in my mind, a chilling prophecy of my demise. But I wouldn't go down without a fight. I would find a way to break the curse, to restore balance to Whispering Pines, to protect my campers from the horrors that lurked within. Even if it meant facing the Spider Witch and her army of darkness. I always thought camping in an RV was the epitome of safety. A cozy haven on wheels, shielding you from the unpredictable elements and creatures of the night. Oh, how wrong I was. It was late June 2019, and my boyfriend, Jake, and I were on a cross-country road trip. We'd been together for a few years, drawn together by our shared love for the great outdoors. We were exploring the western half of the U.S. in our trusty RV, a 20-foot beauty that felt like a home away from home. Our journey took us through New Mexico, a state that, despite its friendly people, gave us an odd sense of unease. Maybe it was the abundance of stop driving drunk signs, but something just felt off. One evening, we found ourselves in a desolate RV park on the outskirts of a small town. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty landscape, we settled into our routine. I set up the awning while Jake took care of the water tanks. A sudden whirring sound caught my attention. I turned to see a man on a quad bike approaching. "Need a hand?" he asked, pulling up beside me. "No thanks, I got it," I replied, trying to appear confident. He dismounted anyway and helped me with the awning. "I'm Mark, I work security here," he said, his eyes darting around nervously. Something about him made my skin crawl. He had a strange intensity, and his eyes seemed to bore right through me. He lingered for a moment, then abruptly turned and sped off into the darkness. "What a creep," I muttered under my breath. Jake, ever the optimist, dismissed my concerns. "He's probably just doing his job," he said. We ate dinner, laughing off the encounter, but a nagging feeling of unease remained. As we drifted off to sleep in our separate bunks, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. I awoke to the sound of an engine outside. It was Mark, circling the RV park in the dead of night. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep, but the sound grew louder, closer. Then it stopped. Silence. Tap. 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 Someone was tapping on the window next to my bed. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. A muffled voice whispered through the glass. "You need to come outside right now." I cautiously peeked through the blinds. It was Mark. "Bring your husband too. It's urgent," he hissed. Fear gripped me. What could possibly be so urgent? I crept towards the door, leaving Jake sleeping soundly in his bunk. I opened the door a crack. "There's someone in the trailer," Mark whispered urgently. "What?" "My boyfriend's in there," I replied, confused. "No, there's someone else in there," he insisted. I stepped outside, my mind still foggy with sleep. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. A loud thud echoed from inside the trailer, followed by a scream. Mark drew his gun and rushed inside. I followed close behind. A man, wild-eyed and disheveled, stood on my bed, clutching a knife. He let out a guttural scream that sent chills down my spine. Jake was awake now, clutching a frying pan in self-defense. The intruder, seeing us, bolted towards the back of the trailer and escaped through the bathroom window. Mark gave chase, disappearing into the darkness. Part 3: The Aftermath. The rest of the night was a blur of police sirens and flashing lights. The intruder was never caught. We learned that he had somehow climbed into the bathroom window while we were asleep. Mark, patrolling on foot, had spotted him and tried to warn us. Shaken and exhausted, we left the RV park at dawn. The idyllic road trip we had envisioned was shattered. We drove straight to my parents' house, eager to put the terrifying experience behind us. The first thing we did upon arrival was sell the RV. Neither of us could bear the thought of setting foot in it again. The memories were too raw, the fear too palpable. As we finalized the sale, I retrieved the title from the glove box. A Polaroid photo slipped out and fell to the floor. I picked it up, my blood running cold. It was a picture of me, asleep in my bunk, taken the night of the intrusion. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the windows of the isolated cabin and sending shivers down my spine. Rain lashed against the roof, a relentless drumming that echoed the frantic beat of my heart. I glanced at the old clock above the fireplace, its hands frozen at some irrelevant hour. Time seemed to have lost all meaning in this forgotten corner of the Appalachian Mountains. The fire in the hearth crackled and spat, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. Even with the flames roaring, a bone-chilling dampness clung to the air, seeping through the cracks in the weathered logs. I huddled closer to the fire, seeking warmth and a distraction from the storm raging outside. "Another cup?" Alex offered, his voice cutting through the silence. I nodded, holding out my mug. He poured the steaming coffee, its bitter aroma mingling with the scent of wood smoke and the lingering remnants of our meager dinner. I added a generous splash of whiskey, chasing away the chill that had settled deep in my bones. "Sarah?" Alex offered the same to her. She nodded, her eyes reflecting the flickering flames. I took a long drag of my cigarette, the smoke curling upwards like a ghostly apparition. I hated instant coffee, but out here in the middle of nowhere, it was all we had. Maybe the whiskey helped, I thought, taking a sip of the burning liquid. I glanced around the cabin, taking in the familiar surroundings. Sarah sat huddled on the faded couch, her gaze fixed on the fire. Alex perched on a stool at the rough-hewn counter, his face etched with a weariness that mirrored my own. We had been holed up in this cabin for weeks now, three strangers brought together by a research project that seemed increasingly pointless. Despite the shared time and space, a sense of unease lingered between us, an unspoken tension that hung heavy in the air. "Hey," Sarah's voice broke the silence, "come sit with me." Alex glanced at me, his expression unreadable, then moved from the counter to the couch beside Sarah. I stubbed out my cigarette and settled into the worn armchair across from them. A heavy silence fell over us, broken only by the crackling fire and the relentless pounding of the rain. "What's up?" Alex finally asked, his voice rough. "I'm bored," Sarah said, a playful smile flickering across her lips. "I need some entertainment." He chuckled. "Entertainment, huh? Don't really think I'm up for that." He started to rise, but Sarah stopped him. "Come on, Alex. Pour yourself another drink and relax. We're stuck here with nothing to do. Let's tell each other stories." "Stories?" I asked, intrigued. "Yeah," Sarah shrugged. "Spooky stories. It's Halloween, after all." Alex settled back on the couch. "All right, fine. I can do stories. Who's first?" Sarah asked. The wind held its answer, sending a fresh wave of goosebumps down my arms. "I guess I'll go," Sarah said, leaning forward. "I've got a good one. It always creeps people out." Alex leaned back, pulling a flask from his pocket. I fished another cigarette from my pack, the flame from my lighter momentarily illuminating the tense faces around me. "This happened when I was 16, Sarah began, her voice low and mesmerizing. "I was dating this guy, and we lived in San Francisco. One night, we decided to take a drive in his vintage Camaro. We found this deserted road out in the hills, parked, and, well, let's just say things got a little heated." I leaned closer, captivated. Afterwards, I got out of the car for a smoke. As I was standing there, I noticed this figure walking towards us. It was dark, and I couldn't make out any details, but there was something about the way he moved. It was fast, almost unnatural. Like he was gliding over the ground. She paused, taking a sip of her coffee. Alex and I exchanged a quick glance, a shared shiver of unease passing between us. I called out to him, asking if he needed help. Sarah continued. "My boyfriend got out of the car too. That's when we realized how fast this guy was moving. My boyfriend offered him a ride, but I swear I heard the guy say no in this panicked voice. My boyfriend didn't seem to hear it, though. Offering a stranger a ride at night? Alex muttered. That's asking for trouble. Yeah, well, we were young and stupid, Sarah said with a wry smile. Anyway, the guy kept walking until he was almost past us. That's when my boyfriend said, loud enough for him to hear, let's just leave this freak alone. The guy stopped dead in his tracks and turned to face us. We were maybe 20 feet away, but in the darkness, I couldn't see his face. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. The shadows in the cabin seemed to deepen, pressing in on us. I was terrified, Sarah whispered. My boyfriend looked pretty spooked too. And the guy, he just stood there, staring at us in the darkness. Did he say anything? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He did, Sarah said, her eyes wide. He said, in this deep, chilling voice, you're lucky you parked where you did. Then he turned and disappeared into the night. That's creepy as hell, I said, a chill running down my spine. Yeah, Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. The next day, we heard about a murder. A young couple killed on that same road, not far from where we had been parked. It was never solved. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a haunting fear. Whoever that guy was, she said, he knew. He knew what had happened, or what was going to happen. And he warned us. A heavy silence settled over the room, thick with unspoken fear and the weight of Sarah's story. I felt a tremor run through me, not from the cold, but from a deeper, more primal fear. Sarah's story had stirred something within me, a memory I had long suppressed. That. I stammered, my voice catching in my throat. That reminds me of something that happened to me. Alex's head snapped up, his eyes suddenly alert. Even Sarah seemed to lean in, her fear momentarily forgotten in the face of a new mystery. It was years ago, I began, my voice hushed. I was just a kid, maybe 12. My friends and I convinced our parents to send us to the same summer camp, Camp Hideaway, it was called. Nestled deep in the woods, miles from civilization. My voice trailed off, the image of that desolate place vivid in my mind. Sarah's eyes were wide with anticipation, while Alex remained stoic, but I could sense his attention was fully focused on my every word. It was a small camp, I continued, maybe 30 kids and a handful of counselors. We spent our days hiking, swimming, telling stories around the campfire. It was supposed to be a week of fun, but it wasn't? Sarah prompted, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her mug. It was, I said, until the last night. My friends and I, along with our counselor, snuck out after curfew. We were huddled around a campfire, telling ghost stories, just like we are now. The wind seemed to pick up outside, whistling through the gaps in the window panes like a mournful spirit. The flames in the fireplace danced wildly, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the walls. Why were you scared? Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Our counselor, Shelley, was telling us this terrifying story about the campers from the previous summer, I explained, my voice dropping to a hushed tone. She said they had disappeared into the woods, and their remains were found scattered amongst the trees. Their intestines strung up like macabre decorations. I shuddered, the memory sending a wave of nausea through me. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Did that really happen?" she whispered. "No," I said, shaking my head. "It was just a story, but we were kids, and we believed it." But then, in the middle of her story, Shelley stopped. She just froze, her eyes fixed on something in the darkness behind me. We all asked her what was wrong, but she didn't answer. Then we heard it, footsteps. Rapid, heavy footsteps approaching us from the darkness. I paused, the memory vivid and terrifying. I could almost hear those footsteps echoing in the silence of the cabin. "And then?" Sarah urged, her voice trembling. "The footsteps stopped," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. We were all frozen, terrified. And then a voice, a deep, raspy voice cut through the silence. It said, "Good thing you're all out here telling stories." A chill ran down my spine, and I could see the fear reflected in Sarah's eyes. Alex sat motionless, his gaze fixed on the fire, but I could sense the tension in his rigid posture. What happened next? Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. The voice, it just faded away, I said, along with the footsteps. We were left there, in the darkness, with our fear and the lingering echo of that chilling voice. We didn't know what it meant, but we knew it was a warning. I paused, my breath catching in my throat. The memory of that night, the explosion, the screams, it all came flooding back, vivid and horrifying. Sarah's eyes were wide with horror, her hand clasped over her mouth. Even Alex seemed shaken, his usual stoicism replaced with a look of genuine concern. We saw it, I continued, my voice barely a whisper. We saw the explosion rip through the cabins, a fiery inferno engulfing everything in its path. The screams, the heat, the smell of burning flesh. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the horrific images. Sarah reached out and touched my arm, her touch a silent offering of comfort. "There were no survivors," I said, my voice cracking. "Except for us." We were spared, huddled around the campfire, protected by some unseen force. We never knew why. A heavy silence fell over the room, the weight of the unspoken question hanging heavy in the air. Why were we spared? What was the meaning of the fast walker's warning? And who, or what, was he? Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the cabin, followed by the sound of splintering wood. We all jumped, our hearts pounding in our chests. Alex sprang to his feet, his eyes scanning the room for the source of the noise. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Another crack, louder this time, and a section of the ceiling sagged inwards, revealing a gaping hole. Rain poured through the opening, drenching the floor and sending a shiver of cold air through the cabin. "The storm," Alex muttered, his face pale. "It's getting worse." But even as he spoke, I knew it was more than just a storm. There was something else, something sinister, lurking in the shadows. I could feel it, a presence that chilled me to the bone. And then, we saw him. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the raging storm, was a figure. Tall, gaunt, with an unnatural gait that sent shivers down my spine. He was drenched, water dripping from his long coat, but his face remained hidden in the shadows. It was the fast walker. Time twisted and contorted, each second stretching into agonizing eternity as we stared at the figure. The shadowy silhouette in the doorway was undeniably the same from both Sarah's and my encounter, the harbinger of cryptic warnings. But now, the question that clawed at my throat was, why was he here? Who was that? Sarah's whisper was barely audible, a fragile thread in the oppressive silence. Alex moved instinctively, placing himself between us and the figure. "Who are you?" he shouted, his voice echoing in the tense space. "What do you want?" The figure offered no reply. He stood motionless in the doorway, an obsidian statue against the raging storm. Rainwater cascaded from his long coat, his face swallowed by the impenetrable darkness. An unnatural chill, sharp and piercing, radiated from him, and the air crackled with an unseen energy. It felt as though the temperature had plummeted, and my breath hitched in my chest. Then, with a deliberate, almost predatory grace that defied human movement, he glided into the room. The shadows danced around him, twisting and contorting, as if they were extensions of his will. They seemed to consume the remaining light, plunging us further into darkness. "We have to go." Alex's voice was a strained whisper, his hand instinctively reaching for the hunting knife at his belt. "Now!" But before we could make a move, the figure raised a skeletal hand, its long, bony finger pointing towards the ceiling. The gesture was stark and urgent, and our eyes followed his direction. The cracks in the ceiling had widened, and dust rained down on us. A low groan echoed through the cabin, a prelude to imminent collapse. Panic surged through me, cold and sharp. The cabin, it was going to cave in. The figure turned towards us, his face still hidden in shadow, but his intent was clear. He didn't need words, his presence screamed a single, terrifying message: run. We didn't hesitate. Adrenaline fueled our flight as we scrambled out of the cabin, the storm a minor threat compared to the terror that pursued us. Behind us, the cabin groaned and buckled, then imploded with a deafening roar. We didn't stop running until we were far away from the wreckage, our lungs burning, our bodies soaked and trembling. We collapsed on the rain-soaked ground, gasping for breath. Turning back, we could see the remnants of the cabin, a pile of broken timber and shattered dreams. But the figure, he was gone. Vanished as quickly as he had appeared. As we huddled together, catching our breath, a wave of icy dread washed over me. The fast walker had saved us, that much was clear. But his silence, his eerie presence, and his sudden disappearance amplified the unsettling feeling in my gut. Who was he? What did he know? And what exactly were we saved from? The storm raged on, narrowing the turmoil within me. The questions lingered, unanswered, echoing in the silence of the night. We had survived, but the encounter had left an indelible mark, a chilling reminder that some mysteries are best left unsolved. The noises began a week ago, subtle at first, like the rustling of leaves or the creaking of old bones. I dismissed them as the sounds of a restless forest, the whispers of a lonely cabin settling into the chilly autumn nights. But as the days passed, the noises grew bolder, more persistent, morphing into distinct thumps that echoed through the silence of my secluded retreat. I live alone in a cozy cabin nestled deep within the woods of rural Maine. It's my escape from the hustle and bustle of city life, a place where I can immerse myself in the quiet solitude of nature and the comforting world of books. As a freelance editor, I spend most of my days confined to my desk, the glow of my laptop screen my only companion. Human contact is limited to the occasional grocery run or a rare visit with my nearest neighbor, Old Man Hemmings, who lives a mile down the dirt road. My bedroom is my sanctuary, a spacious haven with dark oak walls and a worn carpet that muffles my footsteps. A large window overlooks the sprawling forest, offering a breathtaking view of the towering pines and the star-studded sky. Usually, I sleep with the curtains open, embracing the tranquility of the moonlit nights. But lately, a sense of unease has settled over me, a creeping dread that has forced me to draw the curtains closed, shutting out the darkness that seems to press against the glass. The first night it happened, I was wrapping up a late-night editing session. It was around 12:30 a.m., and the only sound was the gentle hum of my laptop. As I stood up to stretch, a soft thump echoed through the cabin. I paused, listening intently, but the sound didn't repeat. Shrugging it off, I attributed it to the old house settling. I headed to the bathroom, a small, cramped space with barely enough room to turn around. As I reached for my toothbrush, another thump reverberated through the cabin, this time louder, more insistent. I frowned, my heart quickening slightly. The old man who sold me the cabin had warned me about the strange noises, the whispers and groans of a house steeped in history. But he had also reassured me that they were harmless, just the echoes of a bygone era. I finished my nightly routine and crawled into bed, pulling the covers tight around me. The moonlight filtered through the gaps in the curtains, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. I tried to relax, to dismiss the unsettling thumps, but a nagging sense of unease lingered. I jolted awake a few hours later, the thumping noise now a relentless drumbeat against the silence of the night. I fumbled for my phone, its pale light illuminating the room. 2:47 a.m. The thumps continued, a rhythmic pounding that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the cabin. I peered out the window, but the darkness was impenetrable. The moon was hidden behind a thick veil of clouds, and the forest was a black abyss. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal, a raccoon or a stray dog, but the regularity of the thumps, their insistent rhythm, sent a shiver down my spine. The thumping continued for what felt like an eternity, then abruptly stopped. I lay in the darkness, my heart pounding, every nerve on high alert. Just when I thought I could finally drift back to sleep, the thumping resumed, closer now, more insistent. It was as if something was circling the cabin, testing its boundaries, searching for a way in. I tossed and turned, the thumping a constant reminder of the unseen presence lurking outside. Finally, as dawn approached, the noises subsided, fading into the first whispers of daylight. I fell into a restless sleep, haunted by the unsettling rhythm that had punctuated the night. The next day, I tried to shake off the lingering fear. I told myself it was just an overactive imagination, the product of too much isolation and too many ghost stories. But the following night, the thumping returned, even louder, even more persistent. This time, it was accompanied by a new sound, a soft scratching against the window pane. I lay frozen in fear, my eyes glued to the curtains, imagining claws scraping against the glass. The scratching continued, a slow, deliberate rasp that set my teeth on edge. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the room. The next morning, I woke with a pounding headache and a deep sense of dread. I knew I couldn't ignore the noises any longer. Something was out there, something that wanted to get in. Driven by a desperate need to understand the source of my torment, I rummaged through the box of belongings the old man had given me when I bought the cabin. Buried beneath a tattered first aid kit and a crank-powered radio, I found it, a motion-activated wildlife camera. A wry smile touched my lips. Who would have thought that this dusty piece of technology would become my lifeline? With renewed determination, I ventured out into the crisp autumn air, the camera clutched in my hand. I mounted it beneath the eaves, angling it towards the window, hoping to capture the nocturnal visitor that had been haunting my sleep. Back inside, I downloaded the corresponding app on my phone, eager to unmask the creature that had been terrorizing me. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fiery orange and deep purple, a sense of anticipation mingled with dread settled over me. Tonight, I would finally have answers. I brewed a cup of chamomile tea, hoping to calm my nerves, and curled up on the couch with a book. But the words blurred before my eyes, my mind consumed by the anticipation of what the night would bring. As darkness enveloped the cabin, I retreated to my bedroom, drawing the curtains tight and burying myself under the covers. The familiar ding of a notification jolted me awake. 2:28 a.m. My heart hammered against my ribs as I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling with a mixture of fear and anticipation. I opened the app, my breath catching in my throat as the live feed from the camera appeared on the screen. At first, I saw nothing but the inky blackness of the night. Then, a movement caught my eye, a shadowy figure huddled beneath the window. It was small, hunched over, its movements jerky and erratic. A raccoon, I thought, relief washing over me. It was just a mischievous raccoon, drawn to the cabin by the scent of something enticing. But then the figure straightened, and a gasp escaped my lips. It wasn't a raccoon. It was something else, something far more sinister. Bathed in the pale glow of the porch light, the creature stood revealed. It was tall, skeletal, its limbs elongated and contorted, as if they had been stretched beyond their natural limits. Its skin was pale and taut, revealing the grotesque outline of its bones. Matted hair hung from its head, obscuring its face, but I could sense its eyes, two black pits that seemed to bore into me. With a jerky, unnatural movement, it raised a hand and tapped on the window. Tap. 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 A scream tore from my throat, a primal sound of pure terror. I fumbled for the phone, my fingers slipping on the smooth screen. The creature's face swam into focus, a grotesque mockery of human features. Its eyes were black beads, devoid of any warmth or emotion. Its mouth was stretched into a wide, unnatural grin, revealing rows of jagged teeth. The creature's entire being radiated a sense of wrongness, a chilling distortion of the natural order. Paralyzed with fear, I watched as it continued to tap on the window, its long, bony fingers drumming a macabre rhythm against the glass. Each tap sent shockwaves of terror through my body, and I could feel my sanity teetering on the brink. Suddenly, the creature's head snapped towards the camera, its black eyes locking onto mine. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I recoiled from the screen as if it were a physical blow. The creature's grin widened, and a low, guttural growl emanated from its throat, a sound that seemed to slither into my very soul. I flung the phone away, its screen shattering against the wall. The room plunged into darkness, but the image of the creature, its grotesque smile and empty eyes, remained burned into my mind. I scrambled back against the headboard, my body trembling uncontrollably. The tapping continued, relentless and mocking. I squeezed my eyes shut, desperate to block out the horrific sight, but the creature's image lingered, a grotesque phantom dancing in the darkness. I felt trapped, suffocated by the oppressive fear that clung to me like a shroud. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the tapping stopped. A heavy silence descended, broken only by the frantic pounding of my heart. I lay there, frozen in terror, every nerve on high alert, waiting for the next onslaught. Minutes stretched into an eternity, the silence amplifying my fear. I couldn't bear the thought of looking at the camera again, of seeing that creature's twisted face. But I knew I couldn't stay here, trapped in this room, waiting for it to return. With trembling hands, I reached for the bedside lamp, its pale light offering a meager defense against the encroaching darkness. I forced myself to look at the shattered phone, its screen a spider web of cracks. The camera app was still open, the live feed frozen on the last image of the creature. It was gone. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I sank onto the edge of the bed, my legs trembling. The creature was gone, but the terror lingered, a suffocating presence in the confines of my room. I glanced at the time, 3:58 a.m. The encounter had felt like an eternity, yet barely an hour had passed. Exhaustion battled with fear, but adrenaline kept me anchored to the present. I couldn't shake the image of the creature, its grotesque form and haunting eyes burned into my memory. The silence of the cabin was now a menacing presence, every creak and groan a potential harbinger of its return. Driven by a desperate need to process the horror, I stumbled towards my desk and opened my laptop. The blank page mocked me, a stark contrast to the chaotic thoughts swirling in my mind. With trembling fingers, I began to type, pouring out the events of the night, hoping to exorcise the fear that clung to me like a suffocating shroud. But the words felt inadequate, failing to capture the sheer terror of the encounter. The creature's unnatural movements, its contorted limbs, and its haunting eyes defied description. It was as if it existed outside the realm of human comprehension, a nightmare given form. As I typed, a new sound pierced the silence, a soft scratching at the front door. My blood ran cold. The creature, it had returned. I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The scratching continued, slow and deliberate, like claws raking against the wood. I held my breath, listening intently, every nerve on high alert. Then, a realization struck me. I had left the front door unlocked. Panic seized me. a suffocating wave that threatened to drown me in its intensity. I scrambled back from the desk, my chair clattering to the floor. The scratching at the door grew louder, more insistent, and I could hear the distinct sound of something heavy scraping against the wood. My gaze darted around the room, searching for an escape, a weapon, anything to defend myself against the creature that was trying to force its way in. But the room offered no sanctuary, only the confines of my own fear. I lunged for the phone, its shattered screen digging into my palm. I fumbled with the buttons, desperate to call for help, but the screen remained stubbornly dark. The creature's growl echoed in my ears, a chilling reminder of its power, its malice. Then, a new sound pierced the air, a splintering crack as the door frame buckled under the creature's relentless assault. I cried out, my voice raw with terror. The door creaked open, revealing a sliver of darkness, a glimpse into the abyss that awaited me. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. But instead of the creature's grotesque form, a different sound reached my ears, a voice, calm and reassuring. "Emily?" My eyes flew open. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the faint light of dawn, was a figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, familiar. "Hemmings?" I whispered, my voice hoarse with disbelief. The old man stepped into the room, his weathered face etched with concern. "Emily, are you all right?" I heard the commotion. His words trailed off as he took in the scene, the shattered phone, the overturned chair, the terror etched on my face. He rushed towards me, his eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and concern. "What happened here?" he asked, his voice gentle. I shook my head, unable to speak, the horror of the night still fresh in my mind. Hemmings wrapped his arms around me, his warmth a comforting contrast to the icy fear that had gripped me. "It's all right, Emily," he murmured. "You're safe now." But even as he spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next opportunity to strike. The encounter had left an indelible mark, a chilling reminder that the darkness held secrets beyond human comprehension. A strangled cry tore from my throat, a desperate plea lost in the echoing silence of the cabin. I stumbled back, my legs tangling in the discarded blanket, sending me crashing to the floor. The creature's silhouette filled the doorway, its grotesque form a stark contrast against the pale light filtering through the shattered window. Its elongated limbs moved with an unnatural fluidity, contorting and twisting in a way that defied human anatomy. The creature's head lolled to one side, its black eyes gleaming with a malevolent hunger. Its mouth gaped open, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth, and a guttural growl rumbled from its throat, a sound that vibrated through the very floorboards. I scrambled backwards, my fingers scrabbling against the rough carpet, desperate to escape the creature's reach. But the room offered no sanctuary, only the confines of my own terror. The creature stalked closer, its elongated shadow stretching across the floor, engulfing me in its darkness. Its hand shot out, long and skeletal, its fingers tipped with claws that glinted in the dim light. I flinched, bracing for the inevitable, but the creature's hand bypassed me, reaching instead for the laptop that lay open on the desk. Its claws raked across the keyboard, leaving deep gouges in the plastic. The screen flickered and died, plunging the room into an even deeper darkness. I whimpered, my voice lost in the creature's guttural growls. It turned its head towards me, its black eyes burning into mine. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I curled into a fetal position, shielding myself from its gaze. The creature loomed over me, its presence a suffocating weight that pressed down on my chest, stealing my breath. Then, with a suddenness that startled me, it turned away, its attention drawn to the shattered phone on the floor. It bent down, its elongated limbs folding in on themselves in an unnatural way, and picked up the phone with its clawed hand. The creature brought the phone close to its face, its black eyes seemingly fixated on the cracked screen. It tilted its head, as if studying the device with a strange curiosity. Then, with a swift motion, it crushed the phone in its hand, the plastic and metal crunching under its immense strength. A guttural sound, a mixture of frustration and rage, tore from the creature's throat. It flung the mangled remains of the phone against the wall, where it clattered to the floor. Then, it turned back to me, its eyes burning with a renewed intensity. I braced myself for the final assault, but it never came. Instead, the creature hesitated, its gaze flickering towards the window. A low growl rumbled in its chest, and then, with a swiftness that defied its size, it turned and leaped through the shattered window, disappearing into the darkness beyond. I lay there, trembling, my breath ragged in my throat. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the pounding of my heart. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe, until the first rays of dawn pierced through the shattered window, casting a pale light on the ravaged room. With trembling limbs, I crawled to the window, peering out into the forest. The creature was gone, vanished without a trace. But the terror lingered, a cold knot in my stomach, a chilling reminder that the darkness held secrets beyond human comprehension. I knew I could never stay in the cabin again. The memories were too vivid, the fear too palpable. I packed a small bag, gathering only the essentials, and left the cabin, locking the door behind me. As I walked away, I couldn't help but glance back, half expecting to see the creature's silhouette watching me from the shadows. But the cabin remained silent, a tomb of shattered peace and lingering fear. I never returned. The biting December wind howled through the skeletal trees of the Rocky Mountains, its icy breath whispering tales of long-forgotten horrors. We, a group of 4 friends fueled by youthful curiosity and a healthy dose of naivety, were venturing deep into the heart of the Route National Forest, seeking a secluded cabin shrouded in chilling folklore. The cabin, known only as Blackwood, had a reputation that would make even the bravest soul shudder. Tales of strange lights, phantom smells, and unexplained disappearances clung to it like a shroud. But the most disturbing legends centered around a locked door within the cabin, a portal to some unknown darkness that whispered promises of unimaginable terror. My friend Mark had heard about Blackwood from a coworker, who regaled him with stories of the cabin's sinister history. He warned us against opening the locked door, claiming it was sealed for a reason, a barrier between our world and something far more sinister. But we, young and reckless, dismissed his warnings as mere superstition. We were ghost hunters, armed with EVP recorders and a thirst for the unknown. What could possibly go wrong? The drive from Boulder was long and winding, the mountain roads treacherous under the December snow. As dusk settled over the landscape, casting long, ominous shadows across the snow-covered peaks, we finally reached the trailhead. The cabin, nestled deep within the forest, was only accessible by foot. We trudged through the snow, our flashlights cutting through the darkness, the only sound the crunch of our boots and the whisper of the wind. As we approached the cabin, a sense of foreboding settled over us. The air grew heavy, the silence oppressive. Blackwood Cabin stood before us, a dilapidated structure half consumed by the encroaching forest. Its roof had caved in, its windows boarded up, its paint peeling like decaying skin. The front door hung precariously on its hinges, a gaping maw that invited us into its shadowy depths. We exchanged nervous glances, our bravado faltering in the face of the cabin's ominous presence. But curiosity, like a moth drawn to a flame, compelled us forward. We stepped across the threshold, our flashlights illuminating the dust-covered interior, and ventured into the heart of Blackwood's chilling mystery. The cabin's interior was a chilling tableau of decay and neglect. Cobwebs draped the furniture like ghostly shrouds, and dust lay thick on every surface. The air was heavy with the scent of damp wood and mildew, a musty odor that clung to our clothes and invaded our nostrils. We moved cautiously through the main room, our flashlights illuminating the remnants of a once cozy living space. A fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth cold and empty. A tattered couch and a couple of rickety chairs sat huddled around the fireplace, their cushions ripped and stained. A doorway led to a small kitchen, its cupboards bare and its sink rusted. Another door, partially hidden behind a tattered curtain, presumably led to a bedroom. But it was the locked door at the far end of the main room that drew our attention, its presence a silent beacon of dread. The door was made of heavy oak, its surface scarred and weathered. A rusty padlock hung from its handle, a defiant symbol of the secrets it guarded. We exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the cabin's sinister reputation pressing down on us. Mark, ever the skeptic, scoffed at our apprehension. "It's just a door," he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Probably leads to a basement or something." But his words did little to ease our unease. The locked door exuded an aura of menace, a palpable sense of something dark and malevolent lurking just beyond its surface. We could feel it, a cold, oppressive presence that seemed to emanate from the very wood itself. "Maybe we should leave it alone," Sarah suggested, her voice barely a whisper. But curiosity, like a relentless tide, pulled us forward. We approached the door, our flashlights illuminating its weathered surface. The padlock hung heavy, its rust a testament to the years it had spent guarding the secrets within. Mark reached out, his hand hovering over the padlock. "What do you think is behind it?" he asked, his voice laced with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Before anyone could answer, a sudden gust of wind rattled the cabin, sending a shiver down our spines. The curtains billowed, casting eerie shadows across the room. And then, we heard it, a soft scratching sound emanating from behind the locked door. We froze, our blood turning to ice. The scratching continued, slow and deliberate, like claws raking against the wood. A wave of terror washed over us, and we instinctively stepped back from the door, our hearts pounding in our chests. The scratching stopped, leaving a silence that was even more unsettling than the sound itself. We exchanged terrified glances, our eyes wide with fear. The locked door, once a mere object of curiosity, had now become a source of palpable dread. We knew then that we had stumbled upon something far more sinister than we could have ever imagined. The whispers of Blackwood Cabin had come to life, and we were trapped in their chilling embrace. The scratching ceased, leaving a silence that crackled with tension. We stood frozen, our breaths held captive in our chests, every nerve screaming with a primal fear. The locked door, once a mere object of curiosity, had become a symbol of unimaginable horror. Mark, his bravado finally shattered, took a hesitant step back. "Maybe we should just go," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. But Lisa, her eyes white with a morbid fascination, shook her head. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We have to know what's behind it." Driven by a morbid curiosity that outweighed our fear, we decided to investigate further. We gathered around the door, our flashlights illuminating the rusty padlock. Mark, with trembling hands, produced a set of lockpicks from his backpack. "I learned a few things in college," he said, attempting a weak smile. He knelt before the door, his lockpicks clicking against the padlock. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the sound of his labored breathing and the occasional creak of the cabin settling around us. After what felt like an eternity, the padlock clicked open. Mark let out a triumphant gasp, but his victory was short-lived. As he pulled the padlock free, a gust of icy wind swept through the cabin, extinguishing our flashlights and plunging us into darkness. Panic erupted. We stumbled back from the door, our hands outstretched, searching for something to steady ourselves. The wind howled through the cabin, rattling the windows and sending shivers down our spines. And then, we heard it, a low, guttural growl, emanating from behind the now unlocked door. Terror gripped us, our hearts pounding in our chests. The growl grew louder, closer, and we knew that whatever lurked beyond that door was no longer contained. We turned and fled, our footsteps echoing through the darkened cabin, the creature's growls chasing us into the night. We burst out of the cabin and into the biting December air, our lungs burning, our bodies trembling. We didn't stop running until we reached the treeline, the cabin's silhouette receding into the darkness behind us. We collapsed onto the snow-covered ground, gasping for breath, our bodies shaking with fear. The creature's growls still echoed in our ears, a chilling reminder of the horror we had unleashed. We had opened the locked door, and in doing so, we had invited the darkness into our world. We scrambled through the darkness, our flashlights dancing wildly, illuminating fleeting glimpses of the cabin's decaying interior. The creature's growls echoed behind us, growing louder with each passing moment. We could feel its presence closing in, its icy breath on our necks. We burst out of the cabin and into the biting December air, our lungs burning, our bodies trembling. The snow crunched under our feet as we fled blindly into the forest, the creature's enraged roar echoing through the trees. We didn't stop running until we reached a small clearing, our flashlights illuminating a circle of snow-covered ground. We collapsed, gasping for breath, our hearts pounding in our chests. The creature's roars had subsided, but the fear lingered, a cold knot in our stomachs. We huddled together, our bodies shivering with cold and terror. Mark, his face pale and drawn, spoke first. "What was that thing?" he whispered, his voice trembling. I don't know, Lisa replied, her eyes wide with fear. But it wasn't human. We sat in silence, listening to the wind whistling through the trees, our minds replaying the horrifying events of the past few minutes. The creature's growls, its distorted form, its unnatural movements, all of it pointed to something beyond our understanding, something that defied the laws of nature. A sudden snapping twig broke the silence, and we all jumped, our hearts leaping into our throats. We spun around, our flashlights illuminating the surrounding trees, but we could see nothing. The sound came again, closer this time, and we knew that we weren't alone. The creature was still hunting us. We scrambled to our feet, our flashlights illuminating the path ahead. We ran, blindly, desperately, through the forest, the creature's growls echoing behind us. We could feel its presence closing in, its icy breath on our necks. We stumbled through the undergrowth, our legs aching, our lungs burning. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, an endless maze of trees and shadows. We were lost, alone, and hunted. As we rounded a bend in the path, we came to a sudden halt. Before us, bathed in the pale moonlight, stood a figure. Tall, imposing, its silhouette shrouded in shadow. It was the creature. It stood motionless, its black eyes fixed on us, its presence radiating a chilling aura of menace. We were trapped, cornered, with nowhere to run. The creature took a step towards us, its elongated limbs moving with an unnatural grace. We cowered back, our flashlights trembling in our hands. The creature's growls grew louder, closer, and we knew that our time was up. A guttural roar ripped through the silence, and the creature lunged. Its claws flashed in the moonlight, reaching for us with a terrifying speed. We screamed, our voices mingling with the creature's enraged cries, a symphony of terror echoing through the forest. Mark, in a desperate act of defiance, raised his camera and snapped a picture. The flash illuminated the creature's grotesque form, its elongated limbs and contorted features frozen in a moment of predatory aggression. But the flash also seemed to enrage the creature further, its roar intensifying, its eyes burning with a malevolent fire. It swiped at Mark, its claws tearing through his jacket, leaving bloody trails across his chest. Mark cried out, stumbling backwards, his camera falling to the ground with a sickening thud. Lisa, her eyes wide with terror, grabbed my hand and pulled me back. "Run!" she screamed, her voice barely audible over the creature's roars. We turned and fled, our footsteps pounding against the frozen ground. The creature's heavy footsteps followed close behind, its enraged growls echoing through the trees. We could feel its presence closing in, its icy breath on our necks. We stumbled through the undergrowth, our legs aching, our lungs burning. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, an endless maze of trees and shadows. We were lost, alone, and hunted. As we rounded a bend in the path, a glimmer of hope emerged from the darkness. A faint light flickered in the distance, a beacon of civilization in the vast wilderness. We pushed ourselves onward, our desperation fueling our exhausted limbs. The light grew brighter, revealing a small cabin nestled amongst the trees. Smoke curled from its chimney, a promise of warmth and safety. We stumbled towards it, our hearts filled with a desperate hope. As we approached the cabin, a figure emerged from the shadows. A man, tall and imposing, his face weathered and stern. He held a rifle in his hands, its barrel glinting in the moonlight. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice rough and gruff. "Help us!" Lisa cried, her voice trembling. "There's something in the woods." The man's eyes narrowed, and he raised his rifle. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Before we could answer, a guttural roar echoed through the trees. The creature emerged from the darkness, its silhouette a terrifying specter against the moonlit sky. It lunged towards us, its claws outstretched. The man didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired, the shot echoing through the silent forest. The creature stumbled, its hand flying to its chest. It let out a guttural cry, a sound of pain and surprise. It turned its attention to the man, its eyes burning with rage. It lunged again, its claws tearing through the air. The man fired again, and the creature staggered, its momentum broken. It fell to its knees, its body convulsing. Then, with a final, shuddering gasp, it collapsed to the ground, its life extinguished. We stared in stunned silence as the creature's lifeless form lay sprawled on the snow, its once terrifying presence now reduced to a grotesque heap of flesh and bone. The man lowered his rifle, his gaze fixed on the fallen creature, his expression unreadable. What was that?" Lisa stammered, her voice trembling. The man turned to us, his eyes filled with a mixture of weariness and pity. "Something you shouldn't have disturbed," he said, his voice gruff. "Something that should have remained locked away." He gestured towards the cabin, its silhouette barely visible through the trees. "That place," he said, "it's cursed. It's been that way for years." He explained that the cabin had been built on ancient burial grounds, a place where dark spirits lingered. The locked door, he said, was a gateway to a realm of shadows, a place where unspeakable horrors dwelt. "You were lucky to escape," he said, his voice grave. "Many others haven't been so fortunate." He invited us back to his cabin, a small, cozy dwelling nestled deeper within the woods. We gratefully accepted, eager to escape the chilling presence of Blackwood and the memories it held. The man, whose name was Jacob, welcomed us with a warm fire and a pot of steaming coffee. We sat around the fire, recounting the horrifying events of the night, our voices trembling with lingering fear. Jacob listened patiently, his expression a mixture of concern and understanding. He told us stories of other encounters with the creature, tales of missing hikers and unexplained disappearances. He spoke of ancient rituals and forgotten lore, of a darkness that lurked beneath the surface of the world, waiting to consume those who dared to disturb its slumber. As the night wore on, our fear gradually subsided, replaced by a sense of exhaustion and gratitude. We were safe, for now, thanks to Jacob's intervention. But the encounter had left an indelible mark, a chilling reminder of the unseen forces that lurked just beyond our perception. The next morning, we bid farewell to Jacob and made our way back to the trailhead, our footsteps heavy with the weight of our experience. As we left the forest behind, we couldn't help but glance back, half expecting to see the creature's silhouette watching us from the shadows. But the forest remained silent, its secrets hidden beneath a blanket of snow. We never spoke of Blackwood Cabin again, but the memories lingered, haunting our dreams, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of the world, waiting to consume those who dared to disturb its slumber. My grandparents owned a cozy cabin nestled beside a serene lake in the heart of Maine. They rented it out to have extra funds for their retirement. Whenever it wasn't occupied, they generously offered me the chance to spend a weekend there. I usually declined, but when my old friend Sarah unexpectedly reached out, eager to reconnect, I couldn't resist. I had some time off, and the cabin was free, so we planned a trip. Sarah was bringing her husband, Alex, whom I'd met a few times, and she suggested inviting our mutual friend, Ben, to join us. We all grew up together, and the cabin had plenty of room. I arrived first and began unpacking when Sarah and Alex strolled down the trail. The path to the cabin was too narrow for cars, so they had to park a short distance away. Other cabins dotted the woods nearby, but ours was secluded, their lights twinkling through the trees at night, their occupants occasionally audible. Sarah embraced me warmly, and I helped them with their bags. Alex, shorter than Sarah, wore large glasses that gave him an oldish appearance. His cheeks were flushed from the brief walk. I suspected a cabin getaway wasn't his cup of tea, but he came along for Sarah. He nodded politely as I reminisced with Sarah about our childhood escapades while we headed inside. A knock echoed through the cabin, and I rushed to answer it. Ben and I had been inseparable growing up, like brothers, but we drifted apart after he married his wife, Emily. Ben, it's been ages. Did you have any trouble finding the place? I inquired, peering out the door, expecting to see Emily. She wasn't there. Ben walked past me, setting down a single bag. We had been to the cabin together before, but this was the first time he was the one driving. Nope, the GPS made it a breeze. I didn't stop for food on the way. Do you have anything to eat? He asked, avoiding any mention of Emily's absence. I exchanged a puzzled look with Sarah, who subtly signaled me to keep my curiosity in check. I was naturally inquisitive, but I respected my friend's privacy. After a round of sandwiches, we changed into our swimsuits. It was still hot and humid despite the approaching autumn. Sarah and Alex opted to stay on the beach, Sarah aiming for a tan and Alex engrossed in a stack of books. I followed Ben to the edge of the dock. My grandparents had left their fishing gear behind, probably high-quality stuff, but I was clueless about fishing. I set it aside and grabbed a couple of chairs, hoping to catch dinner after our swim. Do you have your phone on you? Ben asked out of the blue. I shook my head, confused. My swim trunks didn't even have pockets. Without another word, he effortlessly lifted me and tossed my protesting body into the lake. I surfaced, sputtering and spraying water in his direction. My hand shot out, attempting to grab his ankle and pull him in, but he was too quick. We both laughed as I failed to drag him into the water. I scrambled back to the beach, wincing as my feet encountered the sharp shells of freshwater mussels that washed ashore every night. I charged towards him, determined to get him back, but he effortlessly tossed me into the lake again. We continued this playful battle until we were both exhausted. I doubted we would catch any fish after all the commotion. Ben picked up a fishing rod and baited the hook. I watched him, then made him do the same for mine, earning a playful insult for my aversion to worms. They were just gross, that was all there was to it. With the sun beginning to set, casting long shadows across the water, we settled into a comfortable silence. I had brought my old Game Boy, hoping to finally beat the Zelda game that had haunted me since childhood. When we were younger, I always brought it to the lake, but I never managed to finish it. Now, with an adult mind, I was determined to see it through to the end. What have you been up to these past few years? Any kids on the way? I asked Ben, breaking the silence. A shadow crossed his face for a moment. Sarah never wanted children, but Ben, a devout churchgoer, yearned for a big family. The fact that they didn't have any yet must have been a sore spot. We're working on it, he replied evasively. I didn't pry further. To my surprise, we did manage to catch something. A small, unappealing fish took Ben's bait, and he reeled it in effortlessly. We tossed it back without a second glance. Shortly after, I hooked a long, plump fish that would have been perfect for dinner. Ben removed the hook, and the fish met my gaze with what I swore was a silent plea for its life. It's kinda cute, I admitted, hoping Ben would get the hint. He rolled his eyes but carefully released the fish back into the lake. We have enough food for the weekend. And I don't feel like cleaning it, he said with a grin. I laughed, knowing he often took care of the tasks I disliked. We had intended to help with dinner, but Sarah had already started cooking by the time we returned to the cabin. Cooking was her passion, so I didn't feel guilty about not contributing more. She had a nurturing personality, which made me wonder why she never wanted children. The cabin was spacious but had only a few rooms. Sarah and Alex claimed the bedroom off to the side, next to the bathroom, which was about the same size. We took turns showering after dinner to wash away the lingering scent of the lake. As I emerged from the bathroom, still buttoning my shirt, I encountered Ben waiting his turn. He caught a glimpse of a tattoo on my side, a 3-inch pink Care Bear that he had never seen before. I had worn a shirt while swimming, silently cursing myself for this unexpected revelation. How drunk were you when you got this? He asked, eyebrows raised. Alex, engrossed in his book, remained oblivious, but Sarah shot us a nervous glance. She knew something I had been hiding from Ben. I lost a bet. Needed to man up and get it. I haven't been able to afford to get it removed yet, I lied. He seemed to accept the explanation and moved on. Once the bathroom door closed, Sarah and I exchanged a relieved sigh. I hadn't told Ben about the matching tattoo I had gotten with my boyfriend at the time. It was a foolish decision, and I knew he would tease me mercilessly. But more importantly, I hadn't come out to him about my sexuality, and I was uncertain how he would react. Sarah had been urging me to tell him, but I wasn't ready for that conversation with my oldest friend. We gathered around the table in the living room, planning to play a board game, but it soon devolved into lively conversation and reminiscing. I had expected Alex to be bored, but he was surprisingly engaged, asking questions and sharing stories. The more time I spent with him, the more I realized how perfect he was for Sarah. Finally, the couple decided to call it a night a little after 1 in the morning. Ben retreated to the loft up the steep stairs, leaving me to claim the couch by the fireplace. It was still too warm to light it, and the cabin was plunged into darkness when the lights were switched off. You never realize how bright the city is until you're away from it. We exchanged sleepy goodnights. I briefly considered playing my Game Boy but decided against it. I had the whole weekend for that. The quiet was perfect for drifting off to sleep. I fell asleep quickly, but it felt like only a moment before a jarring noise jolted me awake. It was a loud rumble, like thunder, that shook the entire cabin. The digital clock nearby flashed 3 a.m. I was about to dismiss it and go back to sleep when I heard Ben whisper from the loft, "Did you hear that bang?" My eyes adjusted to the dim light, and I realized it was brighter than it should be. The sun hadn't risen yet. Glancing outside, I noticed a strange orange glow in the sky. My mind raced. There wasn't a forest fire, was there? Ben, also noticing the eerie glow, started down the stairs, just as Sarah emerged from the bedroom, followed by Alex, fumbling with his glasses. "Do you think it's a storm?" I asked, hoping for a simple explanation. A sudden chill swept through the air, and I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. Sarah shivered, and Alex instinctively embraced her, rubbing her arms for warmth and reassurance. Ben briskly crossed the room and flung open the front door. I rose and peered over his shoulder, my mind struggling to comprehend the sight that greeted us. It was snowing. Not just a light dusting, but a full-blown blizzard, seemingly out of nowhere. A gust of frigid wind blasted through the open door, instantly chilling us to the bone. Ben slammed the door shut, his face etched with confusion. "I'll get a fire started," Alex offered. "Don't bother. Everyone bundle up and grab your keys," Ben instructed. We needed to get out of there before we were snowed in. Chapter 2: The Storm. We didn't have much in the way of winter clothing. Our pajamas were the warmest things we had on. I rummaged through the closets and found some old sweaters my grandparents had left behind. Sarah had only brought sandals, so I found some spare shoes for her. We wrapped blankets around ourselves for extra warmth. I told everyone to hold hands in a line as we ventured out into the blizzard. After a few seconds of bracing ourselves against the onslaught of the storm, Ben opened the door. Could we even drive in this? I thought. Maybe moving slowly out of the woods would be better than getting stranded inside the cabin. The wind whipped at our faces, and snow and ice stung our eyes. I had to shut them against the biting cold. When I opened them again, I was disoriented. We had been walking away from the left side of the cabin, towards the cars. But now, the cabin loomed in front of us. I knew it wasn't a different cabin. None of the others along this road looked like my grandparents. We stood there, exchanging bewildered glances. How had we gotten turned around? "Stay here," Ben said, his voice barely audible above the wind. I protested as he jogged away, his form quickly swallowed by the swirling snow. Suddenly, something slammed into my back. I spun around to see a terrified Ben. He had been in front of me, but now he was behind us. "How?" Without a word, he darted towards the cabin, aiming to run into the forest behind it. Again, he vanished into the storm, only to reappear a second later, running into me from the opposite direction. "What the fuck is going on?" he yelled, his voice strained. I barely registered his words. My attention was drawn to the lake. A sight so unnatural, so terrifying, materialized through the blinding snow. It was a dark shape, immense, reaching into the sky. It hadn't been there before. I desperately hoped my eyes were deceiving me. But the shape began to move, twisting slowly as if it sensed my gaze. All other sensations vanished. I no longer felt the cold, heard the wind, or felt the hands gripping mine. My world narrowed to that monstrous shape. No, countless shapes, intertwining, shifting, their forms flickering with an array of otherworldly colors. Bursts of purple and green pulsed across the sky, an alien aurora borealis. A primal fear gripped me, threatening to consume me. I would have lost myself in that moment if Ben hadn't snapped me out of it with a sharp slap across my face. The cold returned with a vengeance. My legs buckled, and I collapsed. Ben and Alex dragged me back inside the cabin. They laid me on the couch and began stripping off my freezing, wet clothes. My body shook uncontrollably. My mind reeled with questions and terror. "Did you hear it?" Ben asked, pausing in his ministrations. "Hear what?" I stammered through chattering teeth. He studied me intently for a moment, then let the matter drop. Alex found dry blankets and cocooned me in warmth. I longed for a hot shower but couldn't summon the energy to move. Sarah appeared with steaming mugs of tea. We sat in silence, sipping our drinks, avoiding any mention of the horror we had witnessed. Finally, Ben broke the silence. "Does anyone have a working phone?" We had been too terrified to think clearly. We all checked our phones, only to find them dead. The power had gone out when we entered the cabin. The fireplace and wood stove provided light and heat, and thankfully, my grandparents had stocked the place with plenty of firewood. But there was no radio, no way to contact anyone in case of an emergency. "What are we going to do?" Alex asked, his voice barely a whisper. None of us wanted to say it out loud. There was nothing we could do. No way to contact anyone, no way to escape the cabin, and no way to know what that monstrous presence lurking in the lake was or what it wanted. "We wait out the storm," Ben said, trying to sound confident. The wind rattled the cabin, and I doubted his plan. But we had no other options. No one mentioned our dwindling food supplies. Instead, I pulled out my Game Boy and asked who wanted to help me play. Perhaps we should have been doing something more productive, but we felt so helpless. Huddled together, taking turns focusing on the small screen, was strangely comforting. Alex helped by writing down quest goals and strategies. We were all exhausted by the time we reached the end of the game, only to be thwarted by dead batteries just before the final battle. We searched the cabin for replacements, but there were none. A strange sense of dread washed over me as I realized I might never see the ending of that game. It was long past when the sun should have risen, but the sky remained dark, the storm raging unabated. After the Game Boy died, Alex suggested we try to get some sleep. I doubted anyone could rest after such a harrowing night. We didn't want to be separated, so we gathered all the blankets, sheets, and pillows in the cabin and piled them in the living room by the couch. Sarah took the couch, and the guys settled on the floor. The fireplace kept the cabin warm, but it did little to ease our fear. I managed to sleep for an hour or so, plagued by fragmented nightmares. Ben woke up first and began pacing restlessly, his face etched with worry. He clutched a small gold cross that his mother had given him. I couldn't imagine how this was affecting him. Sarah woke up and busied herself in the kitchen, taking inventory of our remaining food and planning meals. Alex seemed the most stressed of all. He kept picking up the same book, reading a page, and then setting it aside. None of us wanted to talk about what we had seen outside. It was as if speaking about it would make it real. If we ignored it, maybe it would go away. I had nothing to do but tend the fire. Without power, it was difficult to track the passage of time. Hours seemed to melt into one another. Maybe I should try for the cars again, Ben said, finally breaking the silence. No! Sarah and I shouted in unison. Ben flinched at our outburst. He frowned, clearly disagreeing with our reaction, but he didn't argue. I didn't think Sarah had seen the same thing I had at the lake, but she knew something was out there, and she was terrified. People are expecting us back by the end of the weekend. We can wait out the storm until they come and get us, she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Ben turned away, not wanting to start a fight. He doubted anyone would come looking for us. I knew he would wait at least another day before braving the storm again. And somehow, I knew that if any of us left the cabin, we wouldn't come back. I just didn't know who we would lose first. Of the bedroom, her face pale, crying for her husband to return. I grabbed her and pulled her back inside, away from the biting cold. We waited, the door wide open, snow swirling into the cabin. We refused to shut our loved ones out, no matter how cold it got. An hour crawled by, each minute an eternity. Then, a dark shape emerged from the blizzard. My heart pounded in my chest, fear gripping me once more. It was Ben, collapsing through the doorway, his body trembling, his lips blue. Sarah rushed to his side, and together, we dragged him towards the fireplace. I frantically peeled off his icy clothes and wrapped him in warm blankets. Sarah walked to the door, hesitated, and then gently closed it, accepting the devastating truth. Alex wasn't coming back. Get him in the shower after he warms up a little, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. I'll put away the food. We'll need it if we're going to be here for a while. I followed her instructions. She needed to stay busy, to keep her mind occupied. None of us had attempted a hot shower since the first night. To my dismay, the water was ice cold. Sarah and I boiled snow and filled the tub. Ben hadn't regained consciousness. I was worried. Once the tub was full, I gently touched his cheek. He stirred, showing signs of life. After a while, he was able to sit up. With my help, he managed to get into the bathroom and lower himself into the tub, his eyes closed, his face drawn with exhaustion. I turned to leave, but his hand shot out and grasped my wrist, pulling me closer. I sat beside the tub, my back to him. I couldn't find him, he said, his voice hoarse. It's okay, I murmured, unsure what else to say. No, it's not okay, he snapped, his voice raw with grief and frustration. He needed to vent, and I let him. He sank back into the water with a sigh. Did you hear whatever it was that Alex heard before he left? He asked, his voice quieter now. No, I replied, glancing at him over my shoulder. He didn't seem surprised. Neither of us elaborated, afraid of what the answer might reveal. After his bath, Ben got dressed. When we returned to the living room, we were alarmed to find Sarah missing. We rushed into the bedroom and found her standing in the middle of the room, staring at the walls. Alex had covered the walls and floor with strange symbols. None of us could make sense of them. I gently led Sarah out of the room and sat her on the couch. She seemed distant, lost in her grief. I returned to the room with Ben. We scanned the cryptic symbols, trying to decipher their meaning. Alex was pretty smart, I remarked, assuming it was some language he knew that we didn't. Was? Ben asked, turning away from the writing. I didn't mean it like that. I trailed off. Even if we didn't say it out loud, we both knew Alex wasn't coming back. Just like we knew that something sinister lurked in the lake, orchestrating this storm. None of us felt like eating, despite our rumbling stomachs. We didn't want to sleep either. It was impossible to tell day from night now. There was nothing to do but worry and wait. Sarah couldn't bear to be in the bedroom, and it gave me the creeps too. She also wanted to be alone, so Ben and I shared the loft. It had 2 beds, so it wasn't a problem. I carried extra blankets up the wooden stairs, along with a couple of books, silently thanking Alex for bringing them. I was settling into bed when I noticed Ben dragging the nightstand between the beds away and pushing the second bed against mine. What are you doing? I asked, confused. It's colder up here, he replied, as if that explained everything. I'll be fine, I protested. I won't. I'm freezing my ass off. He pushed the beds together and piled the blankets on my side. He climbed into bed beside me, our sides touching. It was warmer, but undeniably awkward. He picked up one of the books and pretended to read, but his eyes kept flicking towards the window, watching the relentless storm. How do you think Tiffany is doing? I asked, trying to break the tension. Tiffany was a good friend of ours, until she came out as transgender. Ben had cut off all contact with her, refusing to acknowledge her existence. Soon after, she moved away, and I lost touch. I don't know. I guess fine. I heard she had a crappy uncle and it broke apart her family. Why do you ask? I stared at him, stunned. Had I misjudged him all these years? He referred to Tiffany as she. I never expected that. Ah, this book has a trans character. It made me think of her. I lied. He raised an eyebrow, skeptical of my excuse, but he let it drop. After a while, I closed my book, hoping to get some sleep. A low rumble echoed from outside, and I clutched the blankets, my stomach twisting with fear. I imagined the creature outside claiming me as it had claimed Alex, my mind conjuring up gruesome scenarios. Ben sat up and reached behind his neck, removing the small gold cross. He leaned over and tried to place it around my neck. I instinctively raised my hand to block him. "That's too important to you," I protested. "You're more important to me," he said, his voice soft and low. My heart skipped a beat. This didn't feel real. I could accept the horror outside, but this unexpected tenderness from my oldest friend was almost too much to bear. "Are you scared?" he asked gently. A wave of emotions I had been suppressing overwhelmed me. I hated myself for nodding, and even more for letting him hold me as I sobbed quietly into his shoulder. I shouldn't be accepting his comfort when I hadn't lost what Sarah had. And yet, I did. After my brief outburst, I let him put the cross around my neck, promising to return it later. I let him keep his arm around me as he finally fell asleep. I didn't know if he needed someone beside him to relax, but I didn't mind. The storm raged on, a constant reminder of our isolation. Time lost all meaning. We could only gauge its passage by the dwindling food supply. Our meals grew smaller and smaller, no matter how hard Sarah tried to stretch them. It was long past the weekend, and no one had come looking for us, or at least, no one had found us. During that time, Sarah never mentioned Alex. We didn't dare bring him up. We played board games, trying to distract ourselves from the despair that threatened to consume us. There were 3 of us, and yet I had never felt so alone. I started to refer to the intervals between retreating to the loft as days, regardless of how much time had actually passed. We would wake up, read, eat a meager meal, and then sleep for what felt like an eternity. 2 days after our last real meal, I finally gave up. There were spices and condiments left, but none of us were desperate enough to start eating ketchup packets. Yet. I opened my eyes, intending to get out of bed, but I couldn't summon the energy. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the same horrifying thoughts that had tormented me since the storm began. Hours passed, and Ben noticed I hadn't moved. He had been playing cards with Sarah, but she was growing weaker, dark circles under her eyes despite all the sleep. She collapsed on the couch, and he retreated upstairs. The fire had died down, and the loft was cold. The chill nipped at my face and toes. "Sarah's asleep," he whispered, sitting beside me. "She'll be out for a while," he added. I nodded, unable to speak. I just wanted to fade away. But his next action jolted me back to reality. He slid his arm around my waist, his face close to mine. I raised my hands to stop him. "Oh there, buddy." "That's a sin," I joked weakly. It was an old joke between us, me commenting on his sinful behavior, whether it was or not. A smile flickered across his face, and it warmed me despite the dread that gnawed at me. I had always wanted to see that smile, and I hated how much it affected me. "Do you think any of that matters anymore, with that thing outside?" he asked playfully, but his voice held a hint of fear. The wind howled against the windows as if in response. My mouth went dry. "Haven't you always liked me? If I'm wrong, I'll stop." My heart pounded in my chest. He was right. Damn him, he was right. I had always loved him, even before I understood what those feelings meant. Everyone I had ever dated had reminded me of him in some way, but I respected him too much to ever let him know. But now, did it matter anymore? I lowered my hands, allowing him to close the distance. After so long in the grip of fear and cold, I craved warmth, any kind of warmth, even if it meant compromising my principles. I had hoped that connecting with someone I cared about would make this unbearable situation a little better. But instead, a fever swept over me. I wanted to get out of bed, but I was too weak to even lift my head. I drifted in and out of consciousness for what felt like days, subsisting on sips of hot water that Ben brought me. When the fever finally broke, I could move again. The aroma of food filled the cabin. Ben had been resting beside me. I woke him up. The days trapped in the cabin had taken their toll on him. He had lost weight, and his eyes were sunken. But he still smiled when he saw I was feeling better. Then, a frown creased his brow. We had run out of food days ago. What was Sarah cooking? He helped me down the stairs. It was clear I wouldn't have the strength to climb back up, so we would need to bring down all the essentials. My head swam, and my vision blurred. It took me a moment to focus on Sarah, stirring a pot on the wood-burning stove. Then, my stomach lurched, and my legs gave way. "Hey, sweethearts. Sorry it took so long. I made something for you." She turned, her face pale and gaunt, her clothes hanging loosely on her emaciated frame. Blood stained her left side and the wooden floor. An empty sleeve dangled where her left arm used to be. I stumbled backward, collapsing onto the floor, unable to process the gruesome sight. I didn't need to see what was in the pot to know. Why hadn't we risked the storm instead of letting it come to this? Somehow, Ben managed to get me back into the loft and into bed. I prayed I wouldn't wake up, but I did. "Is she?" I asked, my voice cracking. "I'll keep an eye on her," he said, making sure I was comfortable. He looked better. How long had I been out? What had happened while I was unconscious? "You should eat something." "It's what Sarah wants," he said gently. I shook my head, my stomach churning. "Let me die here," I begged, too exhausted to even cry. He cupped my face in his hands. "I'm not going to let that happen. I gave up everything I believed in for you. It can't all be for nothing." He leaned down and kissed me. If he was offended by my lack of response, he didn't show it. I couldn't face what was happening. I was a coward, escaping into sleep, hoping my dreams wouldn't be as horrifying as reality. The storm raged, shaking the cabin. But I found a new resolve. I had to get outside, no matter what that creature did to me. Step by step, I crept down the stairs. Ben wasn't in the loft, and I didn't see him or Sarah in the living room. I cautiously made my way towards the kitchen. Sickening chewing sounds came from behind the dinner table. I didn't see Sarah, just a dark shape hunched over, feeding on something on the floor. "Ben," I whispered, my voice trembling. His head snapped up, his eyes glowing white in the darkness. Then, silence. The storm that had held us captive abruptly ceased. The sky remained dark, but the wind died down. I turned and ran, Ben scrambling after me on all fours. I reached the door just as he grabbed my shirt. But what I saw when I flung it open wasn't the snow-covered lake. It was the thing. That monstrous, swirling mass of shapes pressed against the cabin door. I stared into it, its mind-bending colors and alien emotions flooding my senses. Shadowy limbs reached out, both infinitely close and impossibly distant. A mad cackle erupted, and I dimly realized it was my own. Strength surged through me. I felt like I could run forever, live forever, become something else entirely. I reached out, yearning to accept its offer. The door slammed shut, and I was dragged to the ground. I thrashed, screaming, desperate to break free and embrace that otherworldly existence. Anything to escape myself. Ben's clawed hands gripped my shoulders, his strength inhuman. He had changed. His eyes glowed white in the darkness, and his teeth were elongated, sharp. He didn't look like the Ben I knew, but there were still traces of the human he had been beneath the monstrous facade. Darkness seeped into my soul, threatening to overwhelm me. I wanted it all to end. Just let Ben eat me and be done with it. Death was a far more comforting prospect than whatever the creature wanted me to become. Then, his eyes fell on the glint of the cross around my neck. A flicker of human emotion crossed his face. Fear, pain. I wanted it to be over. "I'll take it all for you," he rasped. I shook my head, knowing that if he took my burdens, there would be no coming back. He might be part monster now, but he could still escape this cabin with some of his humanity intact. The creature outside didn't want him. My protests were weak. Instead of tearing into me with his sharp teeth, he pulled me into a tight embrace. There was another way out. In the end, I accepted his offer, choosing the coward's way out. After so long in the cold, I never thought I would feel such intense heat again. The creature outside shrieked in frustration, its cry shaking the world, and then everything faded to black. I woke up in a hospital bed, my mind hazy. Gradually, I recovered and learned what had happened. A freak storm had ravaged the area, and a small tornado had destroyed several cabins, including the one we were staying in. The bodies of Sarah, Alex, and Ben were never found, presumed dead. Over 11 people disappeared in that storm. Whispers spread through the community about how there had never been a storm that severe, let alone a tornado. But I knew the truth. We had been taken by something beyond human comprehension. After all, no one could explain why I had lost so much weight in the 3 days it took to find me in the wreckage of the cabin. I still carry the memories and scars from that place. And I still wear the golden cross, the gift from my best friend, the man I foolishly fell in love with. He changed. Ben wasn't human anymore, but he wasn't what that creature wanted him to be either. He was trapped somewhere in between. I don't know where he ended up, but I refuse to believe he died in that storm. I need to find him, to make things right. At the very least, he deserves to have someone to keep him warm again. When I recover, I'm going back to the lake to help with the cleanup effort and to search for the man who saved my life by taking on my burdens.